Thanks for joining. Find your most relaxing position, take a slow breath in, and let's begin our very quiet stroll through history. If you're enjoying these sleep stories, feel free to give us a like or subscribe, but no pressure at all. Now, let's start our journey. Young Thomas Edison was the kind of kid who'd take apart your clock just to see what made it tick, and probably put it back together with a few extra gears. Born in 1847 in Milan, Ohio, a town so small it makes a postage stamp look spacious, Edison wasn't exactly handed the blueprint for greatness. His dad, Samuel Edison, was a jack of all trades and master of none, dabbling in everything from lumber to real estate, while his mom, Nancy, was the kind of supportive parent who didn't just tolerate Tom's quirks, she nurtured them. Here's a fun fact to chew on. Edison was mostly deaf by the time he hit adulthood, thanks to a bout of scarlet fever and a well-timed boxing of the ears from a train conductor. But what some might see as a disadvantage, Edison turned into a strength. The noise of the world faded, leaving him to focus intently on his thoughts. It's like having noise-cancelling headphones, but without the hefty price tag. Now, let's talk about young Tom's early experiments. You see, when most kids were busy playing marbles, Edison was knee-deep in chemicals. And not just any chemicals, sulfuric acid, phosphorus, and all those delightful concoctions that have flammable written all over them. Picture this. A makeshift lab in the basement of the Edison family home, a place where the air was always a little too electric and the floor a little too sticky. The pièce de résistance, the time he almost burned down the family barn. According to legend, and by legend I mean his sister's exasperated accounts, Tom managed to set the barn ablaze during one of his experiments. It's like the 4th of July, but with more panic and less hot dogs. Edison's first foray into entrepreneurship wasn't far behind. At 12, he started selling newspapers on the Grand Trunk Railroad. Imagine that! A kid barely out of the age of finding his own socks, hawking headlines to commuters. He even had the audacity to print his own newspaper, the Weekly Herald, on the train, turning one of the baggage cars into a mobile newsroom. Talk about multitasking. It's like an early version of BuzzFeed, but without the clickbait. Now, let's address that age-old question. Was Edison a genius, or just a really lucky tinkerer? Here's the thing. Genius and luck are often dance partners. Edison had a knack for persistence, a trait that most inventors would kill for. He wasn't afraid to fail. Heck, he embraced it. His mantra? I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. If that's not a lesson in resilience, I don't know what is. But let's not sugarcoat it. Edison was no saint. He was known for being fiercely competitive, often in ways that would make a modern patent attorney cringe. Take his infamous feud with Nikola Tesla, for example. Edison was the DC, direct current, to Tesla's AC, alternating current, and their rivalry was more electrifying than a lightning storm. Edison even went so far as to publicly execute animals using AC power to prove it was dangerous. It was a PR stunt that would make even the most cutthroat marketers blush. Yet, despite his cutthroat methods, Edison's curiosity was genuine. He wasn't just about the money or the fame. He was a man obsessed with the process of creation. By the time he was 22, Edison had filed his first patent for an electric vote recorder, a device so ahead of its time that politicians, ever the fans of glacial progress, rejected it. Go figure. In the grand tapestry of history, Edison is both a hero and a hustler, a visionary and a pragmatist. His early life is a testament to the power of curiosity, the kind that doesn't just ask why, but why not. And in a world where the line between genius and madness is often as thin as a filament in one of his light bulbs, Edison walked it with a plume, leaving behind a legacy that's anything but dim. And speaking of legacies, let's talk about the moment in 1877 when Edison didn't just step into the spotlight. He catapulted there with the invention of the phonograph, a contraption so revolutionary, it was like dropping a smartphone into the age of telegrams and horse-drawn carriages. Picture it, a machine that could capture sound and play it back. It was as if Edison had bottled a voice and let it loose, much to the astonishment and delight of anyone who heard it. In an era where communication was limited to face-to-face chats or the occasional letter, the phonograph was nothing short of a marvel. It was the Twitter of its day, but with less trolling and more actual conversation. The reality, though, was a bit less romantic than the legend. The phonograph wasn't born from a eureka moment, but rather from Edison's work on improving the telegraph and telephone. His goal was to create a machine that could automatically repeat messages, a sort of stenographer on steroids. Instead, he stumbled upon a way to capture sound, thus birthing the phonograph. Edison was thrilled, dubbing it his baby, and predicting it would take the world by storm. And it did, in a way. When he first demonstrated it, people were floored. The phonograph made him a household name, and newspapers dubbed him the Wizard of Menlo Park, giving him a title that was as much PR gold as it was a nod to his genius. Now, let's dig into the economic impact of this so-called talking machine. Edison's phonograph wasn't just a nifty gadget, it was a disruptive force in industries ranging from entertainment to business. Suddenly, music wasn't confined to live performances. It could be mass-produced and sold, giving rise to a whole new market. By the late 1800s, phonographs were being used not just for music, but for everything from audiobooks to language lessons. Heck, even your great-great-grandparents could have learned French from a cylinder recording, which was probably the 19th century equivalent of Duolingo. The phonograph also shifted the economic landscape. Imagine the ripple effects. Jobs in manufacturing, distribution, and sales sprouted up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. By 1890, the phonograph industry was generating over 1 million annually, a tidy sum when you consider that a loaf of bread cost about 5 cents. Edison had tapped into something big, and he was hungry for more. But let's not ignore the less savory side of Edison's meteoric rise. The man was relentless, known for his manic work pace that would put even the most caffeine-addicted Silicon Valley startup to shame. He famously claimed to sleep only 4 hours a night, a feat that might impress your boss, but would make most sleep therapists faint. His insomnia-fueled productivity wasn't just a quirk, it was a necessity. Edison had a knack for juggling multiple projects at once, and he knew that staying ahead of the competition meant burning the midnight oil, literally and figuratively. However, with great invention comes great controversy, or at least in Edison's case, the occasional questionable business practice. Patents were his battlefield, and Edison was a warrior who preferred winning to playing nice. He held over 1,000 patents, but some of those came with a side of drama that was half courtroom, half soap opera. Take the time he took credit for the invention of the light bulb. While Edison's version was indeed the first commercially viable one, he wasn't the first to think of it. British inventor Sir Joseph Swan had already created one, and they ended up in a legal tangle that was as messy as a Victorian ball gown in a mud puddle. The two eventually settled their differences by forming a joint company, but not before Edison had lost his cool a rare occurrence for a man known for being unflappable. And then there were the patent wars over the phonograph itself. In the 1880s, the North American Phonograph Company, which Edison had a stake in, found itself in a tangled mess of litigation. Competing companies popped up like daisies, each claiming a piece of the phonograph pie. Edison, never one to shy away from a fight, defended his patents with the tenacity of a terrier on a mailman's leg. It was a tumultuous time, but Edison thrived on it. He once remarked, "I find out what the world needs. Then I go ahead and try to invent it." The world needed sound, and Edison was determined to be the one to deliver it, come hell or high legal fees. In the grand scheme of things, Edison's phonograph was more than just a nifty gadget. It was a catalyst for change, a harbinger of the digital age before anyone even knew what that meant. It took Edison from the workshop to the world stage, transforming him into an icon of American ingenuity. Yet for all the accolades and adulation, he remained a man of contradictions, equal parts visionary and businessman, innovator and opportunist. His story, like the phonograph itself, was one of endless possibility, with just a hint of static. As Edison's phonograph spun its way into the hearts and homes of the public, another invention was flickering to life in his Menlo Park lab, one that would illuminate not just rooms but entire cities, the electric light bulb. And while Edison wasn't the first to have a bright idea about electric lighting, Sir Joseph Swan, he was the first to make it practical and marketable. Think of it as the difference between having a great recipe and opening a successful restaurant. Edison's bulb was the first to last long enough to make its glow worthwhile, clocking in at a whopping 1,200 hours after a lot of trial and error. If there was a World's Most Persistent Man award, Edison would have taken it home, hands down. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of this story, the infamous War of the Currents. Picture it, the late 19th century, a time when the world was caught in an electrical arms race more thrilling than any reality TV showdown. On one side, you had Edison, the Grand Master of Direct Current, DC, a system that was about as practical as using a garden hose to fill a swimming pool. DC was great for short distances, but it didn't do well over long hauls. Enter Nikola Tesla, the Serbian wizard whose alternating current, AC, was the electrical equivalent of a high-speed, train-efficient, powerful, and capable of travelling vast distances without losing steam. Edison, ever the showman, wasn't about to let his DC empire crumble without a fight. He embarked on a PR campaign that would make even P.T. Barnum blush, and here's where it gets shockingly bizarre. To prove AC's supposed dangers, Edison orchestrated public demonstrations where he electrocuted animals, including an elephant named Topsy to showcase the lethal potential of AC power. It was a stunt as ethically dubious as it was morbidly compelling, and it turned the whole affair into a media circus. It's the kind of PR move that today would get you cancelled faster than you can say blackout. While Edison was busy electrifying the headlines, George Westinghouse was quietly backing Tesla's AC system. Westinghouse, a savvy businessman with a nose for innovation, saw AC's potential and funded Tesla's work, turning the battle into a heavyweight match. Edison versus Westinghouse became the talk of the town, a clash of titans that would decide the future of electricity. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about pride or proving a point. It was about money, power, and the chance to light up America like a Christmas tree. The stakes were higher than a kite in a thunderstorm, and the economic implications were colossal. Whoever won would control the electrical infrastructure of the future, a market worth billions in today's dollars. Edison's DC system required power stations every mile or so, while AC could be generated at a single site and transmitted over long distances, slashing costs and infrastructure needs. It was the kind of economic advantage that made investors drool and competitors nervous. But while Edison was busy playing the villain in his AC nightmare theatre, Tesla and Westinghouse were quietly racking up victories. In 1893, the Chicago World's Fair, also known as the World's Columbian Exposition, became the site of their crowning achievement. Westinghouse, using Tesla's AC system, won the contract to power the event. It was a dazzling display of technology that electrified the night sky and proved AC's superiority for all to see. Suddenly, AC wasn't just a contender, it was the future. However, the narrative of Edison as a relentless villain and Tesla as the misunderstood genius doesn't capture the whole truth. Here's the myth-busting reality check. Edison wasn't just a ruthless businessman, he was also a relentless innovator. His stubborn defense of DC wasn't solely about ego, he genuinely believed in its safety and had invested heavily in its infrastructure. As for Tesla, he was indeed a genius, but also an eccentric dreamer who often struggled with the practicalities of bringing his ideas to market. And let's not forget Westinghouse, the pragmatic powerhouse who saw the potential in Tesla's ideas and had the business acumen to bring them to life. In the end, it's hard to paint anyone as purely black or white in this electric saga. Edison, Tesla, and Westinghouse were all pioneers in their own right, each contributing to a revolution that would change the world. By the turn of the century, AC had emerged victorious, lighting up homes and cities across the globe, while Edison's DC was relegated to niche applications. Yet, if there's a lesson here, it's that innovation is rarely a straight line. It's messy, competitive, and often requires more than a little showmanship. Edison's tactics might have been questionable, but they were part of a broader narrative that defined the era, a time when inventors were rock stars and the world was their stage. As AC took the spotlight, Edison would move on to other ventures, his legacy secure, but his methods forever debated. And as for Tesla, his AC dream had won, but his personal journey was far from over. So, as the dust settled on the War of the Currents, the world was left brighter, both literally and figuratively. Edison, Tesla, and Westinghouse had set the stage for the modern electrical era, a testament to the power of innovation, rivalry, and a little bit of spectacle. But remember, this is just one chapter in the electrifying story of Edison's life. There are more twists and turns to come, so stay tuned for the next installment of this illuminating tale. As the dust settled on the electrifying War of the Currents, Edison found himself ready to illuminate a whole new stage, literally. Enter the world of motion pictures, a realm where Edison's knack for innovation and his flair for spectacle would once again collide. But let's be clear from the outset, while Edison's name looms large over the film industry's early days, his role was more puppet master than auteur. If cinema were a play, Edison was the guy in the control booth, pulling strings and making sure the spotlight stayed firmly on him. Now, let's set the scene. It's the late 1880s, and the world is on the brink of a visual revolution. Edison, ever the opportunist, saw the potential to capture life in motion. In classic Edison fashion, he didn't just want to be part of the show, he wanted to own the stage. So he tasked his assistant, the often underappreciated William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, with developing a device that could do just that. The result? The kinetoscope, an early motion picture exhibition device that would become the ancestor of the modern movie projector. Picture this, a box-like contraption equipped with a peephole through which viewers could watch moving images. Unlike today's plush cinema seats, the kinetoscope experience was solitary, a kind of Victorian Netflix binge, but with fewer options and no popcorn. In 1891, Edison unveiled the kinetoscope to the world, and by 1894, the first kinetoscope parlor opened in New York City. For a nickel a pop, patrons could lose themselves in the flickering magic of vaudeville acts, boxing matches, and the occasional scantily clad dancer, a Victorian scandal in its own right. But let's not romanticize Edison's motives. While he might have been a technological trailblazer, his vision for the film industry was less about artistic expression and more about economic domination. Edison wasn't interested in making movies, he wanted to manufacture them, patent them, and, most importantly, profit from them. He was like the Steve Jobs of his era, minus the turtleneck, but with the same focus on brand supremacy. Speaking of patents, let's talk about Edison's love affair with intellectual property. If you think Hollywood is litigious today, you should have seen Edison in action. He held a stranglehold on the technology required to make and show films, thanks to a raft of patents that covered everything from the camera to the projector. This gave him a near monopoly over the budding industry, a fact that didn't sit well with the independent filmmakers of the time who were keen to tell their stories without paying Edison a dime. But where there's a will, there's a way, and the independent filmmakers weren't about to let Edison's iron grip choke their creativity. Into the patent wars, a series of legal skirmishes that would make any courtroom drama look like a friendly debate club. Edison's Motion Picture Patents Company, formed in 1908, was essentially a cartel that sought to control production, distribution, and exhibition of films in the United States. If you wanted to make a movie, you had to pay up or face the legal equivalent of a public flogging. Yet, as much as Edison tried to script the industry's future, even he couldn't foresee the plot twist that would ultimately shift the power dynamics. You see, the independents weren't just scrappy filmmakers, they were savvy business people who realized that the best way to escape Edison's reach was to move west, far west. Thus, Hollywood, with its sunny skies and distance from Edison's New Jersey headquarters, became the new epicenter of the film industry. And let's not forget the role that the economic realities of the time played in this westward migration. Land was cheaper, labor was plentiful, and the climate was ideal for year-round shooting. Edison's attempts to litigate filmmakers into submission only pushed them to become more innovative, more determined, and ultimately more successful. So, did Edison invent the movies? Not exactly. He certainly contributed to the technology that made them possible, but the art of filmmaking as we know it owes just as much to those who broke away from his grasp. Edison was more conductor than composer, orchestrating the industry's early days, but ultimately unable to dictate its future. And let's not overlook the irony here. Edison, the man who once electrified the world with his innovations, found himself outmaneuvered by a band of rebels who saw the bigger picture, literally and figuratively. The industry that Edison helped birth eventually grew beyond his control, proving once again that innovation is a wild beast that refuses to be tamed. As the film industry flourished under California's sun, Edison's influence dimmed, but his legacy was far from over. The kinetoscope may have been a stepping stone, but it was one of many in a career marked by both brilliance and controversy. Edison's foray into motion pictures was just another chapter in a life filled with contradictions. a man who sought to harness the world's wonder, often at the expense of those who dared to dream beyond his shadow. Stay tuned, because the story of Edison's life is as layered and complex as a 10-reel epic, with more drama and intrigue than a Hollywood blockbuster. As we turn the page, Edison's saga continues, revealing yet more about the man who was as much a master of invention as he was a maestro of control. As we pivot from the golden age of Edison's cinematic ventures, let's take a good, hard look at the twilight of his career, a time when the star of Menlo Park began to flicker, albeit never extinguish. You see, even the most prolific inventors had a dry spell, and Edison was no exception. His later years were a mixed bag of innovation, stubbornness, and the occasional dud that even a master marketer like him couldn't polish into gold. Let's start with one of those lesser-known flops, the electric pen. Yes, you heard that right. Before the iPad stylus was a twinkle in anyone's eye, Edison was doodling with electricity. The idea was to create a motorized pen that could make copies by perforating paper with tiny dots, essentially a precursor to the mimeograph. It was the 1870s version of a photocopier, minus the reliability. While it sounds nifty, in practice it was like trying to write your grocery list while riding a mechanical bull. It didn't catch on, and Edison quietly shuffled it into the back of his patent closet. But hey, not every idea can be a light bulb moment. Speaking of light bulbs, as Edison's inventiveness began to dim, he grappled with the reality that the world was moving faster than his ideas. By the 1920s, a new wave of inventors was sweeping in, and Edison's penchant for clinging to his own technologies started to look less like loyalty and more like stubbornness. His refusal to embrace AC power over DC was a classic example. Like an old rocker refusing to switch from vinyl to digital, Edison held fast to his beliefs even as the world moved on. And then there was his foray into the world of rubber. Ever the optimist, Edison thought he could revolutionize the rubber industry by finding a domestic source for natural rubber, a strategic move during World War I when supplies were tight. He experimented with over 17,000 plant species, desperately trying to extract enough latex to make tires. The man was nothing if not persistent, but alas, the only thing he managed to stretch was his patience and his wallet. The project was eventually abandoned, leaving Edison with a botanical graveyard and a pile of debt. But let's not paint Edison as a washed-up inventor clinging to past glories. The reality is far more nuanced. Even in his later years, Edison's mind was a hotbed of ideas. Take his work on batteries, for instance. While not as glamorous as the phonograph or the light bulb, his development of the nickel-iron battery was a game-changer for electric vehicles. It wasn't perfect, but it laid the groundwork for the rechargeable batteries we rely on today. It's like the granddaddy of Tesla's lithium-ion power packs, proof that even when Edison's star was waning, his influence was anything but. Now, let's talk legacy. When Edison passed away on October 18, 1931, at the age of 84, the world dimmed its lights in tribute, a fitting send-off for the man who had brightened so many lives. But what are we really left with when the Edison myth meets reality? Was he a wizard, a shyster, or a little of both? The truth is, Edison was a master at crafting his own legend. His nickname, the Wizard of Menlo Park, was as much a PR stunt as it was a nod to his genius. Yet, behind the curtain, Edison was a shrewd businessman who knew the value of a good story. He cemented his place in history not just through invention, but through sheer force of personality. Edison understood that to captivate the public and the investors, you needed more than just technical prowess. You needed charisma, showmanship, and a touch of audacity. He was the Steve Jobs of his time, a man who could sell you a vision even if the prototype was still held together with duct tape. Yet, for all the myth-making, the man himself was a bundle of contradictions. Edison was both a champion of innovation and a ruthless competitor who wasn't above using cutthroat tactics to protect his turf. He was a visionary who sometimes failed to see beyond his own inventions, a man whose greatest strength was arguably his ability to bounce back from failure. So, what's the final takeaway from the Edison saga? Perhaps it's that innovation is messy, unpredictable, and often requires a willingness to fail spectacularly. Edison's life was a testament to the power of persistence and the belief that success is born from the ashes of 1,000 failures. He may have been a flawed hero, but he was a hero nonetheless. a man whose light continues to shine in every home, every gadget, and every flash of inspiration. In the end, Edison's legacy is as complex as the man himself. He left us with more than just inventions. He left us with a blueprint for creativity, a reminder that the path to greatness is often littered with missteps, detours, and the occasional electric pen. So let's raise a glass to Thomas Edison, a man who dared to dream big, failed often, and in doing so, changed the world. Cheers to the imperfect genius, the tireless tinkerer, and the enduring myth of the Wizard of Menlo Park. Gustavus Adolphus, the very name, sounds like a cocktail of royalty and a touch of Scandinavian mystery, doesn't it? But don't let the regal syllables fool you into imagining a serene childhood filled with frosty winter wonderlands and endless feasting in candlelit halls. Young Gustavus, born in Stockholm on December 9, 1594, was not handed a silver spoon, but more like a battle axe with a note saying, "Best of luck, kid." His dad, Charles IX, had a penchant for leaving political messes everywhere, kind of like those friends who never clean up after the party. By the time Gustavus was old enough to run, he wasn't just learning to walk, but also to navigate the minefield of Swedish politics. Now, you might think, hey, what's the big deal about being a teenage king? Well, let's set the scene. 1611 was not exactly the era of TikTok influencers and avocado toast. This was the time when the world was a mad whirlpool of territorial disputes, religious conflicts, and, of course, the ever-coveted throne games. Our boy Gustavus didn't just get to wear the crown. Oh no, he ascended the throne at the ripe old age of 17, when most of us were still figuring out how to parallel park or survive high school without a meltdown. Gustavus's ascension was as smooth as a porcupine on a slip and slide. Inheriting a crown in the early 17th century was like being handed a live grenade and being told, "See what you can do with this." The kingdom he took over was embroiled in what historians politely call political chaos. Charles IX had stirred up enough trouble to make even the most seasoned drama queen blush. There were wars with Denmark, Russia, and Poland, not to mention internal strife. Think Game of Thrones minus dragons, but with plenty of real-life firepower. But here's where Gustavus was different. While most teenagers were busy carving their initials into tree trunks, Gustavus was busy carving out his place in history. He had a knack for military strategy that was as sharp as a Swedish steel blade. At 17, he wasn't just sitting in a throne room wearing a fancy hat. He was out there, actively figuring out how to not only survive, but thrive. His education, a blend of classical studies and real-world politics, had been intense. He was fluent in several languages: Swedish, German, Dutch, French, Latin, and Italian. Quite the linguist, right? Though I bet he never had to cram for a vocabulary quiz. But knowledge alone was not his only weapon. Gustavus had a flair for the dramatic, a bit like a Shakespearean hero, though with more of a battlefield bent. He wasn't the type to sit back and let others do the dirty work. No, this guy was front and center, leading charges and orchestrating battles with a flair that would make even the most hardened generals sit up and take notice. His youthful exuberance was matched by a keen mind that could turn the tides of battle with a single decisive movement. His ascension was marked by the Treaty of Neerd in 1630, ending one of the many conflicts with Denmark. It was a diplomatic dance, a careful negotiation that showed Gustavus was more than just a warrior. He was a peacemaker too, when necessary. Not that he was always successful. His battles with Russia and Poland would drag on, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. In short, Gustavus Adolphus wasn't your run-of-the-mill monarch. He was a combination of youthful energy, strategic brilliance, and yes, a bit of that audacious Swedish swagger. He took a chaotic situation and turned it into the foundation for what would become one of the most formidable military forces of the 17th century. And let's be honest, he probably did it all while sporting a very impressive moustache. Now, Gustavus Adolphus didn't just wake up one day and decide, hey, let's revolutionize warfare. But history tends to remember him as the guy who tossed the military playbook out the window, and for good reason. Our Swedish powerhouse had a knack for turning the ordinary into extraordinary, kind of like transforming a high school marching band into a world-class orchestra, but with cannons instead of clarinets. At the heart of his genius were a few key innovations. First up, mobile artillery. Now, before you yawn and mutter big deal under your breath, consider this. In Gustavus's day, Artillery was about as mobile as a stubborn mule. Cannons were heavy, cumbersome, and about as portable as a boulder. But Gustavus, ever the tinkerer, took a look at these lumbering beasts and thought, why not give them some wheels? So he streamlined the artillery, making it lighter and, crucially, mobile enough to maneuver during battle. This wasn't just a small step, it was a cannonball-sized leap forward that changed the game entirely. By 1620, the Swedish army was packing these lighter, more nimble cannons that could reposition quickly, turning the tide of battles with the kind of swiftness that left opponents blinking in disbelief. Imagine the enemy's shock when, after carefully setting up for a long, drawn-out artillery exchange, they suddenly found their position flanked by Swedish guns zipping around like caffeinated squirrels. Gustavus turned artillery into a chess piece that could actually move rather than just a weighty pawn. But he didn't stop there. Gustavus was like the Steve Jobs of military tactics, always thinking about the user experience, or in this case, the soldier experience. He orchestrated a harmonious blend of arms that made his forces a symphony of destruction. Enter the combined arms tactics, where infantry, cavalry, and artillery worked in concert rather than as separate entities. This wasn't just revolutionary, it was practically heretical to the military minds of the day. Most armies then operated like a disjointed family reunion, with everyone doing their own thing. Gustavus, however, gathered the clan together for a coordinated assault. His infantry, trained to move in flexible lines rather than rigid formations, could adapt on the fly. Cavalry was used not just for charges but for strategic flanking maneuvers, while those nimble cannons provided the thunderous overture. This integration of forces allowed him to outmaneuver adversaries who thought they knew the rules of war. Suddenly, the Swedish army wasn't just an underdog, it was a cunning fox in a field of lumbering hounds. And then there's the 30 Years' War, that European extravaganza of chaos and carnage. When Gustavus marched his troops into the fray in 1630, he wasn't just another player on the stage. He was the lead act, bringing with him innovations that would echo through military history like a rock concert in a cathedral. The Swedes were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their depth, at least according to conventional wisdom. But Gustavus didn't care much for convention. By the Battle of Breitenfeld in 1631, Gustavus's strategies were in full swing. He took on the Holy Roman Empire's forces, which were like the Avengers of their day, except with more pikes and less charisma. Using his newly minted tactics, he delivered a decisive victory that left Europe buzzing. His army's ability to respond to threats and seize opportunities mid-battle was a revelation, like discovering that the key to winning Monopoly is actually reading the rules. While it's easy to paint Gustavus as a military savant, let's not forget the economic context here. Sweden was not exactly swimming in riches at the time. Funding an army required more than just brilliant tactics, it needed cold, hard cash, something Sweden was perpetually short on. So Gustavus did what any savvy leader would do, he turned to war spoils and foreign subsidies. The French, locked in their own existential struggle against the Habsburgs, were more than willing to open their coffers to support a man who could annoy their perennial rivals. Think of it as an early version of crowdfunding, with the French acting as the enthusiastic backers. Gustavus's campaigns were as much about economic survival as they were about military triumph. He had to keep the fiscal wheels greased while his soldiers did their dance of death across Europe. The logistics were a nightmare, like trying to organize a concert tour with a band of rock stars who only speak in grunts and demands for more ale. Yet, despite the challenges, the Swedish war machine under Gustavus became something of a legend. His innovations spread like wildfire, influencing military tactics for generations. The appeal of his story is undeniable, a young king transforming his underdog nation into a superpower through sheer will, ingenuity, and a healthy dose of Scandinavian bravado. But strip away the romance, and the harsh reality reveals an unrelenting quest for survival, fueled by the cold calculus of war. So here we are, with Gustavus Adolphus not just as a footnote in history, but a headline act. Our Swedish king didn't just adapt to the chaos of the 30 Years' War, he thrived in it, redefined it, and, in doing so, etched his name into the annals of military history. Stay tuned, because there's more to this story, and trust me, it only gets more intriguing from here. And so we arrive at Breitenfeld in 1631, where Gustavus Adolphus, the rock star of military innovation, prepared to take on the Holy Roman Empire's finest, led by none other than General Tilly. Tilly was a veteran commander with a record that would make any leader feel like they're still playing with plastic soldiers. But Gustavus, ever the disruptor, wasn't about to let a little thing like Tilly's experience put a damper on his plans. Let's set the stage. The Swedes, alongside their Saxon allies, were up against a force that outnumbered them, with the imperial army boasting around 35,000 troops to the Swedish Saxon contingent's 40,000. You might think having the numbers would ease the pressure, but with allies like the Saxons, it was like partnering with a band whose drummer always loses the beat. However, Gustavus wasn't daunted. He'd brought his A-game and, crucially, his innovative tactics to the field. The battle kicked off on September 17, 1631. Picture a crisp autumn day, with the kind of tension in the air that usually precedes a high-stakes chess match, except this time the pieces were human and the stakes were life and death. Gustavus deployed his troops in a formation that was as much about flexibility as it was about firepower. His lines were deep, allowing for reinforcements where needed, and his mobile artillery was ready to do its thing, like a military version of a flash mob. But here's the kicker. Gustavus didn't just rely on his troops' prowess. He used the terrain to his advantage, positioning his forces on the high ground. It's a classic move, but in warfare, as in real estate, location is everything. The Swedes and their allies were spread out in a crescent shape, a tactical decision that allowed them to envelop the enemy like a warm, albeit deadly, embrace. Now Tilly, confident in his own might, launched his attack with the kind of gusto you'd expect from someone who's played the game for decades. His forces hammered the Saxons, sending them into a panicked retreat faster than you can say strategic withdrawal. This was the first of many blunders that characterized the battle. But Gustavus, unruffled by the Saxon retreat, held his ground. His infantry, well-trained and disciplined, didn't break ranks, showing the kind of resolve that would make even a Zen master proud. Gustavus then executed a maneuver that would become legendary. He shifted his forces to fill the gap left by the fleeing Saxons, like a skillful chef covering a botched dish with garnish. His cavalry, no longer needed to protect the flanks, charged into the fray. This wasn't just a cavalry charge, it was a symphony of hooves, steel, and the kind of chaos that turns the tide of battle. The Swedish artillery, those nimble guns on wheels, began to pepper the imperial ranks with a relentless barrage. Imagine the shock of Tilly's men, expecting a static engagement only to face a thunderous onslaught from cannons that moved and fired with alarming precision. The imperial army was caught off guard, like someone expecting a slow waltz but getting a mosh pit instead. Gustavus's use of combined arms tactics, where infantry, cavalry, and artillery worked in concert, was like watching a perfectly executed dance routine, albeit one with a body count. Each element supported the other, creating a devastating synergy that left the imperial forces reeling. Tilly, for all his experience, was unprepared for this level of coordination and innovation. And then there was the Gustavus effect, as I like to call it. His presence on the battlefield was more than just symbolic. He led from the front, not from a cushy tent miles away, inspiring his troops to levels of bravery that would put any motivational seminar to shame. There's something about having your king fight alongside you that makes you want to give it your all, even if it means charging headlong into chaos. The outcome? A decisive victory for Gustavus Adolphus and the Protestant forces. The imperial army, once considered invincible, was in tatters, suffering around 7,000 casualties with another 5,000 taken prisoner. In contrast, the Swedish-Saxon alliance lost approximately 5,500 men. It was a staggering blow to the Catholic League, turning the tide of the 30 Years' War and solidifying Gustavus's reputation as a game-changer. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. The victory at Breitenfeld wasn't just a triumph of tactics, it was also a testament to the brutal reality of war. Gustavus's forces didn't just defeat the imperial army, they decimated it, with all the grim consequences that come with such a victory. The battlefield wasn't just a place of glory, but a stark reminder of war's harsh truths. Men, reduced to numbers, fighting and dying for causes larger than themselves. But what a cause it was. Breitenfeld wasn't just a battle, it was a seismic shift in European warfare. Gustavus's innovative tactics spread like gossip at a royal court, influencing military doctrines across the continent. Armies that had once relied on sheer numbers and brute force began to see the value of flexibility, coordination, and mobility. The age of the rigid pike square was coming to an end, and in its place was a more dynamic, strategic approach to warfare. That's the thing about Gustavus Adolphus. He was both the legend and the reality. His victories were as much about inspiration and innovation as they were about the brutal calculus of war. He wasn't just a king on a battlefield. He was a visionary reshaping the very nature of conflict, one cannonball at a time. So, as we leave Breitenfeld in our rearview mirror, let's remember that while history loves a hero, it thrives on complexity. Gustavus Adolphus was both a hero to his people and a complex figure navigating the tangled web of 17th century politics and warfare. And trust me, the story doesn't end here. There's plenty more to uncover about our Swedish lion and the legacy he left in his wake. As we leave the echoes of Breitenfeld in our rearview mirror, the myth and reality of Gustavus Adolphus as a military genius and national hero beckon us like a siren's call, promising both inspiration and a hard look at the gritty truths of history. Gustavus wasn't just building a legacy, he was crafting a legend, one that would be polished and spun into a shimmering narrative by the propaganda of the era. Let's start by setting the stage for the myth. Picture a world where information travelled at the speed of a horse's gallop, not the tap of a screen. In this 17th century landscape, propaganda was a powerful tool wielded by monarchs like Gustavus with the flair of a modern-day PR guru. His victories were not just reported. They were elevated to epic status, turning Gustavus into a figure of almost mythical proportions. The Swedish king was portrayed as the Protestant Hercules, a defender of the faith and a bulwark against Catholic hegemony. His innovations on the battlefield were celebrated as strokes of genius, and it wasn't long before his image was plastered across Europe like a rock star on tour. Pamphlets, songs, and paintings depicted him as the Lion of the North, a warrior king whose deeds would echo through the ages. It was the kind of branding that would make even the most savvy social media manager nod in approval. But let's pull back the curtain on this grand theatre. For all his brilliance, Gustavus wasn't infallible. His strategies were groundbreaking, yes, but they weren't flawless. Battles are messy affairs, and even the most meticulously planned maneuvers can unravel like a cheap sweater when faced with the chaos of war. The reality of Gustavus's campaigns was often a mix of strategic brilliance and sheer, unadulterated luck. The myth, however, left little room for such complexities. Take, for instance, the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, where Gustavus met his untimely end. This encounter was a masterclass in the unpredictability of warfare, a day where the fog of war wasn't just a metaphor, but a literal curtain of mist that descended upon the battlefield. On November 16, 1632, the Swedes faced the imperial forces under General Wallenstein in a clash that would cement Gustavus's place in history, not just for his tactics, but for the manner of his demise. The battle itself was a brutal affair, fought in a landscape obscured by fog so thick you could cut it with a sword. Gustavus, ever the hands-on leader, rode at the head of his troops, a move that was as inspiring as it was dangerous. But here's where reality deals its harsh hand. Amidst the chaos, Gustavus became separated from his troops, his visibility reduced to near nothing. He was wounded, thrown from his horse, and ultimately killed on the battlefield. In a twist worthy of Shakespeare, the king who had reshaped warfare met his end in the pandemonium of his own creation. Yet, his death was quickly spun into a narrative of martyrdom. The chaos of Lutzen was glossed over, and Gustavus was transformed into a heroic figure whose sacrifice would galvanize the Protestant cause. In the aftermath, the Swedish propaganda machine went into overdrive, ensuring that Gustavus's legacy was one of valor, not vulnerability. The aftermath of his death was a textbook example of turning tragedy into triumph. His body was returned to Sweden amid great fanfare, and his funeral procession was an event of epic proportions, a spectacle designed to immortalize a king who had become more than a man. He was now a symbol. Gustavus's legacy was cemented not just by his achievements, but by the stories woven around them, stories that would endure long after the gunpowder smoke of Lutzen had cleared. But let's not forget the economic and political realities that underpinned Gustavus's campaigns. The Swedish war machine was an expensive endeavour, funded by a combination of war spoils and strategic alliances. The French, ever eager to poke the Habsburg bear, had bankrolled much of Gustavus's efforts, seeing in him a useful tool against their Catholic rivals. It was a marriage of convenience, fueled by the pragmatic calculus of geopolitics. Gustavus's military successes were as much about economic survival as they were about military prowess. His ability to sustain a well-equipped army in the field was a testament to his administrative acumen, a skill that often goes overlooked in the shadow of his battlefield exploits. The reality was that war was not just a clash of arms, but a balancing act of logistics, finance, and diplomacy. So here we are, grappling with the duality of Gustavus Adolphus, a man who was both a visionary and a pragmatist, a hero and a mortal caught in the relentless gears of history. His story is a testament to the power of narrative, the way myths can elevate reality, transforming a king into a legend. Yet, beneath the gilded veneer lies the truth of a world where power was a precarious dance, and survival depended as much on cunning and circumstance as on courage and conviction. As we edge closer to the conclusion of Gustavus's tale, let's remember that history is rarely a straightforward narrative. It's a tapestry woven from threads of fact and fiction, where the gleaming armor of legend can often obscure the human stories beneath. And the story of Gustavus Adolphus is far from over. There are more pages to turn, more myths to unravel, and more truths to discover as we continue our journey through the annals of history. And so, as we ponder the tapestry of history that Gustavus Adolphus has woven, it's clear his legacy is as multifaceted as a Swiss Army knife, each blade representing a different facet of his impact on military strategy and national identity. Now, let's peel back the layers of romanticism that have lovingly encrusted his story like barnacles on a ship's hull. First off, let's talk strategy. Gustavus's military innovations were like the iPhone launch of the 17th century, transformative, disruptive, and instantly copied by everyone with a standing army and a pulse. His introduction of mobile artillery, combined arms tactics, and those infamous light cannons turned warfare into a ballet of destruction, where every soldier had to keep in step or risk ruining the whole show. Imagine Napoleon taking notes, or at least he would have had he not been born more than a century later. Gustavus's methods were a precursor to modern military doctrines, emphasizing speed, flexibility, and coordination over brute force. And let's not forget the economic side of this equation. War, after all, is an expensive hobby. Gustavus was like a juggling banker, keeping the coins flowing while ensuring the cannons kept firing. He managed to maintain a formidable military force despite Sweden's decidedly less than fortunate financial state. Picture yourselves funding a world tour while your band is still playing in your mom's garage. The savvy Swede understood the delicate dance of war spoils and foreign subsidies, making allies with deep pockets, like France, his best friends in the geopolitical sandbox. Now, here's where we debunk some myths and add a sprinkle of skepticism. Gustavus wasn't some invincible force of nature, and his campaigns were not without their share of blunders. He had his fair share of missteps, fumbles, and downright disasters. The Battle of Lutzen, where he met his demise, was a chaotic mess that highlighted the unpredictability of war. Heroes aren't born from perfection, but from their ability to adapt and survive, or in Gustavus's case, inspire a narrative that would march long after his last breath. His death was a blow to Sweden, but the legend had already been set in motion. Gustavus was painted as the Protestant saviour, an image that would resonate far beyond Sweden's borders. This mythologizing wasn't just a matter of national pride, it was a political tool, wielded with the finesse of a maestro conducting an orchestra. Propaganda turned him into a larger-than-life figure, a symbol of resistance against Catholic dominance. The reality, however, was far more complex. Gustavus's campaigns were as much about political machinations and survival as they were about religious fervour. Fast forward to today, and Gustavus's legacy still ripples through military strategy and national identity. His approach to warfare laid the groundwork for modern military tactics, influencing countless generals who came after him. The emphasis on speed, mobility, and technology over sheer numbers is a lesson that resonates in boardrooms and battlefields alike. But beyond the tactics, his story serves as a reminder of the power of narrative. History remembers Gustavus not just for his military genius, but for the story that was crafted around him. A tale of heroism, tragedy, and the eternal struggle for survival. And therein lies the true genius of Gustavus Adolphus, his ability to transcend the battlefield and become an enduring symbol, a myth that both inspires and cautions. His life reminds us that history is not just a series of battles and dates, but a collection of stories, each with its own lessons and legacies. So as we close the chapter on our Swedish powerhouse, let's carry forward the understanding that in the grand theatre of history, reality and myth dance hand in hand, shaping the past and guiding the future in ways that are as unpredictable as they are inevitable. If you ever thought airports were chaotic, let's take a trip back in time to ancient Kush, where the real action was on the ground, minus the metal detectors and overpriced coffee. Nestled snugly along the Nile, this ancient powerhouse was the OG travel hub, linking Africa to the Mediterranean like an ancient version of Heathrow, but with fewer delays and more camels. Kush had geography to thank for its star role in the ancient world. Picture the Nile as the ultimate conveyor belt of goods and culture, snaking its way through the desert like a lifeline. Kush, specifically its capital Meroe, was strategically parked right along this watery highway. With the Red Sea to the east, you could almost hear the ancient merchants rubbing their hands together in glee. They had a prime spot to shuffle goods between Africa, Arabia, the Mediterranean, and beyond. It was as if Kush had a backstage pass to the greatest trade show on earth, minus the VIP badge and free samples. Now, let's talk about Meroe, the beating heart of this trade network. Imagine a city that thrived not only on its strategic smarts, but also on its industry. Meroe wasn't just a pretty face with pyramids dotting the landscape like ancient skyscrapers. It was a bustling metropolis where business was the name of the game. From around 800 BCE to 350 CE, it was the center of the Kushite kingdom, making it the place to be for any self-respecting merchant or trader worth their salt or gold or ivory or whatever else was in vogue at the time. Speaking of commerce, camels were the unsung heroes of this ancient narrative. Forget your sleek high-speed trains. These humped beasts were the original freight carriers, trudging across the desert with goods piled high. Picture camel caravans, a bit like a traffic jam on a scorching highway, minus the air conditioning and radio tunes. And river barges? They were the Nile's answer to the cargo ship, gliding along the water under the blazing sun. It was a scene of organized chaos, with the occasional hiccup, perhaps a stubborn camel refusing to budge or a barge stuck on a sandbar. But why was the strategic location such a big deal? Well, in the ancient world, location was everything. Being smack dab in the middle of major trade routes meant you were in the money. Literally. Kush gleefully served as a middleman for the trade in luxury goods like gold, ivory, and exotic animals, which were all the rage among wealthy Egyptians and Romans. These weren't just shiny trinkets. They were the kind of status symbols that ancient influencers would flaunt on whatever the equivalent of Instagram was back then. This trade was the economic lifeline that kept the Kushite kingdom thriving, making Kush an economic powerhouse in its own right. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing, or should I say camel riding. The Kushites had their share of political jostling to contend with. As they rubbed shoulders with powerful neighbors like Egypt and Rome, they had to navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries. You could say they were the diplomatic gymnasts of their time, performing a delicate balancing act to keep everyone happy, or at least not at war. And here's the kicker. Despite the bustling trade and strategic savvy, the history of Kush often gets overshadowed by its flashier neighbors. It's as if they were the lesser-known indie band, forever playing second fiddle to Egypt's rock stars. But don't let that fool you. Kush had a rich cultural legacy all its own, with a unique writing system, grand architecture, and a pantheon of gods that could rival any mythology. So, as we dive deeper into the world of ancient Kush, remember, this was no backwater kingdom. It was a thriving hub of trade and culture, with Meru at its center, orchestrating an ancient symphony of commerce and diplomacy. Stay tuned, because the story of Kush is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, speaking of Kush's bustling trade network, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what really kept this ancient economy alive and kicking like a camel with a purpose. Sure, we all love a good story about pyramids and pharaohs, but the real magic happened in the marketplace. First up, let's talk gold. Yes, that shiny stuff that makes people go wild, even before there were hashtags to flaunt it. Kush was practically swimming in the stuff, thanks to rich mines that peppered the land, particularly around the fourth cataract of the Nile. The Kushites were absolute pros at mining, extracting gold nuggets like they were picking apples off a tree. This wasn't just a side hustle, it was their economic backbone. The gold from Kush was so abundant that it made its way into the treasuries of Egypt and beyond, turning heads from Rome to the Indian subcontinent. They even coined the term nub, meaning gold, a name that stuck to the region like gold leaf on a sarcophagus. But wait, there's more. Kush wasn't just about the bling. Let's not forget ivory, the ancient equivalent of luxury sports cars, and exotic animals that made the Romans' jaws drop faster than a chariot in a ditch. Ivory was highly sought after, carved into everything from combs to art pieces that would make any ancient influencer swoon. The Kushites had access to some of the richest elephant herds in Africa, and they weren't shy about using them. Next on the list of Kushite treasures was iron, the unsung hero of the ancient world. Meroe, the Kushite capital, wasn't just a pretty face with pyramids. It was the industrial heart of Kush, where ironworks were as common as corner coffee shops today. The Kushites mastered the art of iron smelting, producing tools and weapons that were the cutting edge of their time, literally. Imagine a bustling city with furnaces roaring, smoke rising like a modern-day skyline, and skilled artisans hammering out the future, one iron bar at a time. And while we're busy being impressed by their metallurgical prowess, let's not forget the logistics that made all this trade possible. Picture a network of trade routes crisscrossing the desert, like an ancient version of Google Maps, minus the annoying recalculating. These routes connected Kush to the Red Sea ports and beyond, enabling a flow of goods that was as impressive as it was complex. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung heroes of Kush's trade network, the camel caravans. These were the 18-wheelers of the ancient world, carrying everything from gold to grain across scorching deserts. Each caravan was a mini army of camels, led by experienced traders who knew the desert as well as their own beards. They travelled distances that would make your Fitbit weep, sometimes over 1,000 miles. The logistics were mind-boggling, with traders having to plan for everything from water supplies to the occasional sandstorm hiccup. And let's not forget the river barges, gliding along the Nile like ancient cargo ships. These barges were the lifeline of Kush, moving goods up and down the river with a grace that belied the chaos of the bustling docks. Everything from gold to grain found its way onto these vessels, ensuring that Kush remained the beating heart of trade in the ancient world. Yet, despite all this splendor, let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was far from the glamorous tales spun by ancient bards. The trade routes were dangerous, fraught with bandits and hostile forces. The logistics were a nightmare, with delays that would make a modern-day commuter cry. And while Kush was a land of opportunity, it was also a land of harsh realities, where survival wasn't guaranteed and fortunes could be as fleeting as the desert wind. So, as we dig deeper into the sands of time, let's remember that Kush was more than just a pretty face with a golden smile. It was a dynamic, complex society that thrived on trade, industry, and a little bit of luck. And as we continue our journey through the annals of history, keep your eyes peeled for the next chapter, where we'll dive even deeper into the world of ancient Kush. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. But hold on to your camels, because as we delve into the socio-political whirlpool of ancient Kush, it's time to meet the real power players, those who could hold a kingdom in one hand and a trading ledger in the other. Welcome to the world of the Kandakes, the warrior queens who ruled Kush with a potent mix of diplomacy and determination. These queens weren't just figureheads, they were the real deal, calling the shots and playing the political game like ancient chess masters. Picture a board where each piece of the kingdom, each move a strategic alliance or a well-timed trade agreement. Take, for example, Kandake Amanirenas, who reigned from around 40 BCE to 10 BCE. When the Romans under Emperor Augustus tried to pull a fast one on Kush by annexing parts of Nubia, Amanirenas didn't sit back and take it. Instead, she led her troops into battle, showing the Roman Empire that Kush wasn't just a trade hub, it was a force to be reckoned with. This wasn't just about territorial disputes, it was about maintaining control over the lucrative trade routes that made Kush tick. And let's just say, Amanirenas played her cards well, eventually negotiating terms that favoured Kush and kept the trade goods flowing. Now, let's talk about the blending of cultures, because Kush was where Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influences met, mingled, and occasionally clashed. Imagine the cultural potluck at a diplomatic dinner party, Egyptian hieroglyphs sharing the table with Greco-Roman architecture and Kushite religious customs. This cultural exchange was both a boon and a challenge. On the one hand, it brought new ideas, art forms and technologies to Kush. On the other, it meant constantly navigating the tricky waters of cross-cultural diplomacy, where a misstep could lead to anything from a minor faux pas to a full-blown diplomatic incident. One famous cultural mishap involved a Roman envoy who, misunderstanding Kushite customs, accidentally insulted the queen by offering a gift that was, shall we say, less than regal. It's a classic case of when in Rome doesn't always apply, especially when you're not in Rome. But such incidents were overshadowed by the rich tapestry of cultural integration that defined Kush. The Meroitic script, for instance, was a unique writing system that combined elements of Egyptian hieroglyphs with Kushite language. It was a symbol of Kush's ability to absorb and adapt, creating something distinctly their own. And while we're on the subject of politics, let's not forget the economic implications of these cross-cultural exchanges. The influx of foreign goods, ideas, and even people meant that Kush was constantly evolving, reshaping its identity to fit the changing world. This wasn't just a static kingdom resting on its laurels. It was a dynamic society, driven by the ebb and flow of trade and the constant need to adapt to new challenges. The rulers of Kush understood that to thrive, they needed more than just military might or economic power. They needed the soft power of cultural influence and savvy diplomacy. This brings us back to the Kandakis, who were not only political leaders but also cultural icons. They set the fashion trends, influenced religious practices, and even dictated the artistic styles of the day. Their reigns were marked by both prosperity and conflict, as they deftly managed the internal affairs of Kush while keeping a wary eye on Rome and other potential threats. It's a testament to their leadership that Kush not only survived but thrived during periods of intense external pressure. But let's not sugarcoat it. The life of the Kandake wasn't all about grand palaces and ceremonial parades. These queens faced the harsh realities of ruling a kingdom that was constantly under threat from both nature and neighbouring powers. They had to deal with droughts that threatened the agricultural backbone of Kush, manage the ever-present risk of rebellion among the nobility, and ensure that the trade routes remained open and profitable. It was a balancing act that required a keen sense of strategy and an iron will. So, what does this all mean for us, looking back from our modern vantage point? It means that the story of Kush is one of resilience, adaptability, and the power of trade to shape a society. It's a reminder that the ancient world was far more interconnected than we often give it credit for, with goods and ideas flowing across continents and cultures. And it's a testament to the skill and vision of the Kandakes and other leaders who steered Kush through turbulent times, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire us today. As we continue our journey through the sands of time, remember that the story of Kush is far from over. We've only scratched the surface of this ancient civilization's rich history. In the next part, we'll delve even deeper into the economic intricacies and social dynamics that made Kush one of the most fascinating and resilient kingdoms of the ancient world. So, stay tuned, because the best is yet to come, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single camel step of this epic adventure. As we navigate the sands of time, let's dig into the gritty reality behind the glorious facade of ancient Kush. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of gold-laden caravans and warrior queens, but like any grand narrative, there's more than meets the eye. Ancient Kush often gets painted with the same brush as Egypt, an exotic land rich in treasures and monumental architecture, but let's not kid ourselves. Kush wasn't just a shadow dancing in Egypt's spotlight. It was a powerhouse with its own unique swagger, and we've got the receipts to prove it. First up, let's tackle the myth of Kush as merely Egypt's little sibling, constantly trying to catch up. Sure, Egypt had its pyramids and pharaohs, but Kush had its own cultural mojo, and it was far from a copycat kingdom. Consider the Meroitic script. While Egypt was busy carving hieroglyphs, Kush was crafting its own alphabet, a bold move that screams independence. It's a bit like inventing your own language at a time when using someone else's would have been much easier. This script, with its 23 characters, wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a statement of cultural identity. And speaking of statements, let's not ignore the architectural feats of Kush. While the pyramids of Giza are often the poster children of ancient construction, the Kushites had their own pyramid game going strong. Meroe, the heart of Kush, boasts more than 200 pyramids. Take that, Giza. These structures weren't just knockoffs. They were smaller, steeper, and uniquely Kushite. They served as royal tombs, each one a testament to the kingdom's architectural prowess and the ruler's determination to leave a lasting legacy. Economically, Kush was no slouch either. While the glint of gold often hogs the spotlight, the kingdom's wealth didn't just glitter, it clanked, clinked, and clattered too. Iron was the real MVP here. Meroe was the iron capital of the ancient world, the Pittsburgh of antiquity, if you will. With smelting techniques that would make a blacksmith weep with joy, Kush churned out tools and weapons that kept their economy humming. This wasn't just an industrial side gig, it was the backbone of their economic might. Now, let's bust open another misconception, that Kush was perpetually at Egypt's mercy. Sure, there were times when Egypt loomed large, but the Kushites weren't just sitting ducks. They played the geopolitical game like seasoned pros, sometimes allying with Egypt, sometimes giving them the cold shoulder. Take the Napatan period, around 800 BCE, when the Kushite kings didn't just coexist with Egypt, they conquered it, ruling as pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. Talk about turning the tables. This era wasn't about being overshadowed, it was about seizing the spotlight and rewriting the script. But let's not sugarcoat it, the relationship between these two kingdoms was complicated. It was a back and forth that saw periods of peace, trade, and sometimes outright war. The Kushites had to navigate this delicate dance while maintaining their own cultural and political identity, a feat that was as challenging as it was impressive. They weren't just playing defense, they were crafting their own narrative in the shadow of a giant. Let's pivot now to the socio-political scene in Kush, which was as dynamic as the trade routes that crisscrossed its landscape. The Kandakes, those formidable warrior queens, were more than just figureheads. They were the linchpins of Kushite society, wielding power with a mix of diplomacy and military prowess. Kandake Amanishaketa, for example, was not just a ruler, she was a trailblazer, minting her own coins. A move that was both an economic necessity and a bold assertion of autonomy. These coins, adorned with her likeness, were more than mere currency. They were symbols of Kush's sovereignty. And let's not forget the cultural crossroads that was Kush. This was a melting pot where Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influences mingled, each leaving its mark on the kingdom's art, architecture, and even religion. The Temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal is a perfect example of this cultural fusion. It was a sacred site where Egyptian gods were worshipped with a distinctly Kushite twist, a testament to the kingdom's ability to absorb and adapt foreign influences. This cultural blending wasn't just for show, it had real economic implications. By embracing foreign ideas and technologies, Kush was able to keep pace with the changing world, ensuring its trade network remained robust and competitive. This wasn't a kingdom resting on its laurels, it was a society in motion, constantly evolving to meet new challenges. Yet, for all its wealth and might, Kush was not immune to the harsh realities of the ancient world. The trade routes that filled its coffers were also fraught with danger. Bandits, hostile forces, and the unforgiving desert landscape were constant threats, making every journey a perilous endeavor. And let's not romanticize the grandeur too much. Behind the glittering facade lay the harsh realities of a kingdom that had to fight tooth and nail to maintain its status. In the grand tapestry of history, Kush often gets overshadowed by the flashy exploits of its neighbors. But as we've seen, this was a kingdom that stood on its own 2 feet, carving out a legacy that's as fascinating as it is complex. So next time you hear the tales of ancient Egypt's grandeur, spare a thought for Kush, a land of iron and gold, of warrior queens and bustling trade routes. It's a story that's far from over, and trust me, there's plenty more to uncover as we continue our journey through the annals of history. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come, and you won't want to miss a single twist in this ancient saga. Kush, a kingdom that danced on the seams of history, wasn't just playing backup to Egypt's lead. This ancient powerhouse crafted a legacy that would ripple through time, like the Nile itself, wide, deep, and sometimes a bit murky. Now, as we wrap up our saga of the Kushite trade networks, Let's ponder their long-term impact and how they echo into the present. First, let's talk legacy. Kush was a trade titan, no doubt about it. This wasn't just about moving goods from point A to point B, it was about weaving a tapestry of cultures and economies that spanned continents. Picture this: gold from Kush adorning the necks of Roman elites, ivory from its elephants gracing the halls of Greek temples, and iron tools shaping the very infrastructure of ancient civilizations. These weren't just commodities, they were the building blocks of empires. And yet, as grand as it all sounds, the Kushite trade network was a complex beast, not just an ancient Amazon prime. The economic strategies of Kush were as sharp as the iron they smelted. By positioning themselves as the middlemen of the ancient world, the Kushites turned geography into destiny. With the Nile on one side and the Red Sea on the other, Kush was the ultimate trade crossroads. But here's the kicker. They didn't just sit back and rake in the profits. They actively developed infrastructure, like those bustling river ports and well-trodden caravan routes, ensuring goods flowed smoothly from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean and beyond. In doing so, they set a precedent for economic networks that still rings true today. Their legacy isn't just about tangible goods, though. It's about the exchange of ideas, cultures, and technologies. The Kushites were cultural magpies, borrowing and adapting elements from their Egyptian, Greek, and Roman neighbors while retaining their own distinct identity. This cultural exchange wasn't one-way. It was a vibrant dialogue that enriched all parties involved. And here's where it gets interesting. That blending of cultures didn't just stop at art and architecture, it seeped into the very fabric of society, influencing everything from governance to religion. Take, for example, the Meroitic script, a unique alphabet that was born out of this melting pot of influences. It was more than just a means of communication. It was a symbol of Kush's ability to absorb and innovate. This adaptability is a lesson that resonates today in our globalized world, where cultural exchange is as crucial as ever. The Kushites understood that, to thrive, you had to be part of a bigger conversation, not just a footnote in someone else's story. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The reality of Kush's trade network was far from idyllic. Navigating those trade routes was perilous, with bandits lurking in the shadows and the harsh desert climate presenting a constant threat. And while the image of camel caravans trudging across the sands might evoke a certain romance, the truth was grittier. Traders faced grueling journeys, often covering thousands of miles over months, with no guarantee they'd return home safely or at all. Yet this didn't deter them, because the rewards were worth the risk. It's a testament to the enduring allure of trade, a force that has shaped human history as surely as any army or empire. Now, let's zoom out and consider the bigger picture. Kush's trade networks were part of a larger economic ecosystem that connected disparate regions and peoples. They helped lay the groundwork for what would become the Silk Road, a web of trade routes that stretched from China to Europe. In this way, the legacy of Kush extends far beyond its borders, influencing economic patterns and cultural exchanges for centuries to come. It's a reminder that in history, as in life, the ripples of our actions often extend far beyond what we can see. As we reflect on the Kushite legacy, it's clear that their story isn't just a tale of ancient glory. It's a mirror reflecting our own world. The challenges they faced, navigating complex trade networks, balancing cultural exchange with identity, and leveraging geography for economic gain, are all too familiar today. In a world where globalization is both a promise and a peril, the lessons of Kush are more relevant than ever. They remind us that trade is more than just commerce. It's a conduit for connection, a force that binds us together even as it sets us apart. So, as we close the book on Kush's trade networks, let's leave with this thought. History is a cycle, and the past has an uncanny way of echoing into the present. The allure of trade, with its potential for prosperity and peril, is as old as civilization itself. From the bustling markets of Meral to the digital bazaar of today, the game is the same, even if the players and tools have changed. And perhaps that's the real legacy of Kush, a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the dance of trade goes on, weaving its timeless tapestry across the ages. If you were an ancient Egyptian, you'd probably spend a good chunk of your day thinking about linen. And not just any linen. I'm talking the kind that would make your great-aunt's antique tablecloths looked like a pile of wet noodles. Linen was the fabric of choice in ancient Egypt, and for good reason. It was cool, breathable, and, when expertly woven, softer than a kitten's belly. So why was linen such a big deal? Let's unravel that thread. First, let's talk raw materials. Forget today's synthetic blends and poly-whatevers. The Egyptians were all about natural fibers. Flax was the superstar here, the Brad Pitt of ancient fibers. This humble plant, with its delicate blue flowers, was the main ingredient in Egyptian linen. It was grown along the fertile banks of the Nile, where it basked under the Egyptian sun like it was chilling at the world's best all-inclusive resort. Flax was so central to life that they made sure it was sown, harvested, and processed with almost religious fervor. You could say flax was to the Egyptians what coffee is to a sleep-deprived college student, absolutely essential. Now, while they had a soft spot for flax, the Egyptians weren't monogamous in their fiber relationships. Wool made the occasional appearance, but it was like the weird cousin at family gatherings, present but not the star of the show. Wool was considered less desirable, partly because it was seen as ritually impure. Plus, who wants to wear wool in a desert? It would be like wearing a parka to the Sahara, fashionable maybe, but definitely not practical. Once they'd harvested their flax, the Egyptians got down to the business of turning it into linen. And when I say business, I mean serious business. Linen production wasn't just a hobby, it was a booming industry. The process started with soaking the flax to separate the fibers, a step that smells about as pleasant as you'd imagine. Picture a mix of wet grass and old gym socks. Delightful, right? But this was an essential step before the fibers could be spun into thread. And the spinning. It was an art form in itself. Spinners used a simple tool called a spindle to twist the fibers into thread. It was a skill that took years to master, much like trying to understand the plot of a Christopher Nolan film. Once they had thread, it was time to weave. The Egyptians used vertical looms, which, if you're trying to picture it, looked like giant wooden harps without strings. Weavers would deftly maneuver the threads, creating beautiful patterns and textures. The result? Linen so fine, it was said to be worn by royalty and gods alike. In fact, linen was so prized that it was often used as currency. That's right. If you had a stash of high-quality linen, you were basically sitting on a pile of ancient Egyptian Bitcoin. Now, you might wonder, why was linen so valuable? Well, it all comes down to supply and demand. Producing fine linen was labor-intensive and time-consuming, much like trying to get a cat to take a bath. This exclusivity made it a symbol of wealth and status. Even the gods were depicted wearing linen, which tells you everything you need to know about its heavenly reputation. Economically, textile production was a cornerstone of the ancient Egyptian economy. It created jobs, from field workers to spinners to weavers. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of the ancient world. And just like today's tech moguls, those in the textile trade could amass impressive fortunes. Linen's value was so high that it often rivaled gold. Consider that for a moment, a fabric so precious that it could be weighed against a metal that has obsessed humans for centuries. Talk about haute couture, but let's not romanticize it too much. While the upper echelons luxuriated in linen, most Egyptians wore simpler garments. The majority of people weren't swanning around in diaphanous robes. They were wearing practical, durable clothing suitable for agrarian life. Linen's status as a luxury item didn't change the fact that, for many, it was also just what you wore because it was cooler than wool and didn't chafe when you were harvesting your fields. Of course, there's always a twist in the tale. For every beautiful linen robe, there was the reality of back-breaking work. The laborers who grew, harvested, and processed flax weren't doing it for the love of the craft. They were doing it because it was their livelihood. The romanticized vision of Egyptian linen is all well and good, but it was built on the backs of those who worked long hours under that relentless sun with little reward beyond the satisfaction of a job well done. So, next time you slip into your comfortable cotton sheets, spare a thought for those ancient Egyptians and their beloved linen. It's a fabric that tells a story of innovation, economics, and, yes, a little bit of luxury. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, the gods really did envy those finely woven threads. So, while you're drifting off to sleep in your cotton cocoon, let's dive deeper into the Egyptian weaving world, a world where vertical looms, drop spindles, and skillful weavers were the rock stars of their time. Forget your high-tech jacquard loom, these ancient tools could create textiles that would make even the most seasoned Etsy seller swoon. First, let's talk about the vertical loom. This bad boy was the backbone of Egyptian textile magic. Picture a large wooden frame that stood upright, resembling a harp waiting for angelic fingers. It was a marvel of engineering, allowing weavers to create lengths of fabric that could stretch up to 10 meters long. That's nearly the length of a London bus. The vertical loom was an exercise in precision. Weavers used their nimble fingers to pass threads through the warp and weft, creating patterns that were as intricate as they were beautiful. This wasn't just weaving, it was fabric poetry. Enter the drop spindle. Now, this tool may look like something you'd find at the bottom of your grandmother's knitting basket, but don't be fooled. The drop spindle was the unsung hero of ancient textile production. This simple, portable tool allowed spinners to transform flax fibers into thread with the kind of finesse that would make a modern-day artisan green with envy. Imagine spinning a thread so fine that it could pass through the eye of a needle 100 times over. That's not just skill, that's straight-up wizardry. And let's not forget the social fabric of weaving itself. In ancient Egypt, weaving was predominantly a woman's domain. The ladies of the loom were not just creating textiles, they were weaving their way into the social and economic fabric of their communities. Weavers were essential to the household economy. In fact, some were so skilled that their work commanded higher wages than other manual laborers. These women had a craft that was not only respected, but also economically vital. Weaving was one of the few professions where women could gain a semblance of independence and influence. Now, here's where we bust a myth or two. You might picture these weavers as serene artist types, humming a tune as they deftly passed the shuttle back and forth. But the reality was more sweat and less serenade. Weaving was hard, repetitive work. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of the modern-day factory job, minus the health insurance and coffee breaks. It was a physically demanding task that required focus, strength, and a dash of creativity. Yet, for all its challenges, weaving offered women a rare opportunity to contribute financially to their households and gain a measure of respect in a male-dominated society. Economically, these weavers were the quiet architects of Egypt's prosperity. The demand for linen was insatiable, and weaving was big business. With Egypt's population booming, particularly during the New Kingdom period, circa 55 to 7570 BCE, the need for textiles soared. Linen was used for everything from clothing and sails to mummy wrappings. Yes, you heard right. Those bandages around Tutankhamun weren't just for fashion, they were top-tier linen threads. This textile demand created a bustling industry that provided employment opportunities and pumped goods and services into the economy. Think of it as the ancient version of a thriving startup scene, with looms instead of laptops. Now, let's talk numbers. A skilled weaver could produce several meters of linen per day, and given that a good linen tunic required around 5 meters of cloth, you start to see just how much effort went into keeping ancient Egypt stylish. These textiles were valuable commodities, with fine linen fetching prices that could buy you a decent-sized plot of land. Linen was frequently used as a form of payment, particularly for government workers and laborers. It was the Swiss franc of the Nile, stable and universally appreciated. As much as we love to romanticize the past, let's remember the nitty-gritty of this textile tale. The life of a weaver was often dictated by the seasons, much like the farmers who grew the flax. During the inundation of the Nile, when farming was at a standstill, weaving provided a crucial source of income. This cyclical nature of labor meant that weavers were always busy, either growing the flax or turning it into the thread that would eventually find its way onto the loom. Weaving wasn't just a job, it was a life. The rhythmic click-clack of the loom was the soundtrack to daily life in Egypt, a reminder of the hands that worked tirelessly to keep the kingdom clothed and prosperous. While pharaohs and priests strutted about in their diaphanous robes, it's worth remembering the armies of weavers who made it all possible. In the grand tapestry of history, ancient Egyptian textile production is a story of ingenuity, economic might, and social complexity. It's a tale of how simple tools like looms and spindles could create wealth and status, how the hands of women shaped the very fabric of their society. As we weave our way through history, let's not forget the unsung heroes of the loom, those who spun the threads of an empire with nothing more than skill, patience and a bit of ancient Egyptian elbow grease. So, while the gods may have envied those finely woven threads, it was the weavers who truly deserved the praise. Their craft was not just a means to an end, it was a testament to human creativity and resilience. Next time you pull on a t-shirt or admire a piece of fabric art, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those ancient artisans. Because, in the end, we're all just threads in the grand tapestry of time, hoping to leave a mark that lasts longer than our fleeting years. While we marvel at the legacy of ancient Egyptian weavers, let's zoom in on the real action, the textile workshops where the magic truly happened. Imagine a scene buzzing with activity, filled with the hum of looms and the chatter of workers. These workshops were the beating heart of Egypt's textile industry, churning out garments for everyone from the high and mighty to the humble farmer. Now, you might think of these workshops as serene places where artisans quietly pursued their craft. But reality check. This was more like a bustling startup with all the chaos and energy that implies. The air was thick with the smell of raw flax and sweat as workers toiled away to meet the insatiable demand for linen. And trust me, linen was like the avocado toast of the ancient world. Everyone wanted a slice. Hierarchy in these workshops was as structured as a pyramid. At the top, you had the overseers, the big shots who ensured everything ran smoothly. These guys were the alpha weavers, responsible for quality control and making sure nobody slacked off. Below them were the journeymen, skilled workers who knew their warp from their weft and could weave circles around the competition. And then, of course, there were the apprentices, wide-eyed newbies hoping to climb the career ladder and maybe, just maybe, one day become an overseer themselves. Now, let's talk politics. You might not think of weaving as a political act, but in ancient Egypt, everything was political. The production of textiles was closely tied to the state, and not just because pharaohs liked their robes to be on point. Linen was a critical resource for the economy, and its production was often controlled by the government. This was no mum-and-pop operation, it was more like a government-backed monopoly. Textile production was so important that it even intersected with religion. Temples often had their own workshops, where cloth was produced not just for priests and deities, but also as offerings. Yes, you heard right, linen was so valued that it was considered an acceptable gift to the gods. It's like tithing in style with fabric instead of coins. But let's not forget the unsung heroes of this tale, the labourers. These were the folks who spent long hours in the fields, harvesting flax under the brutal Egyptian sun. Their work was back-breaking and relentless, a reminder that even the most beautiful fabric starts with dirt under your fingernails. And yet, without these workers, the entire textile industry would unravel faster than you could say loom malfunction. Economically, textile workshops were microcosms of the broader Egyptian economy. They provided jobs, yes, but they also nurtured skills and innovation. The demand for linen was so high that workshops had to constantly innovate to keep up. This was no static industry. It was dynamic and ever-evolving, much like today's tech sector. Speaking of innovation, let's not ignore the tools of the trade. Weavers employed a range of gadgets to get the job done, from looms that could produce complex patterns to spindles that turned flax into thread with the precision of a Swiss watch. These tools were the secret sauce of the Egyptian textile industry, enabling workers to produce fabrics that were both functional and fabulous. Yet, for all their innovation, the life of a weaver was anything but glamorous. The work was repetitive and tedious, a constant grind that left little room for creativity. Imagine spending your days hunched over a loom, your fingers moving in a blur as you tried to keep up with demand. It's enough to make your average office job look like a vacation. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the challenges, weaving offered a degree of stability and respectability that was hard to come by in ancient Egypt. In a society where social mobility was as rare as a cool breeze in the desert, the textile industry provided a ladder, albeit a rickety one, towards a better life. For many, it was a chance to earn a decent wage and maybe, just maybe, improve their circumstances. Now, let's address the myth that all Egyptian textiles were luxurious and opulent. Sure, the pharaohs and their ilk were swanning around in garments that could double as works of art. But for the average Egyptian, clothing was a matter of practicality, not luxury. Most people wore simple linen garments, designed for comfort and durability rather than ostentation, It was the ancient equivalent of wearing jeans and a t-shirt, functional, reliable, and maybe a little bit boring. And just like today, fashion was a way to express identity. The style and quality of your clothes could signal everything from your social status to your profession. For women, in particular, textiles were a way to gain a measure of autonomy. A skilled weaver could command higher wages and respect, carving out a niche in a society that often relegated women to the sidelines. But let's not get too romantic. The reality was that weaving was hard, thankless work. It was a job that required skill, patience, and a willingness to endure long hours of monotonous labor. Yet, for all its challenges, it was also a source of pride. To be a weaver was to be part of a tradition that stretched back millennia, a tradition that was as integral to Egyptian culture as the pyramids or the Sphinx. So, as we peek into these ancient workshops, let's remember the human stories behind the threads. The overseers who managed their teams with an iron fist, the journeymen who honed their craft with pride, and the apprentices who dreamed of a brighter future. These were the people who wove the fabric of Egypt, one thread at a time, creating a legacy that continues to captivate us today. As we wrap up this chapter, let's leave the loom behind and look forward to unraveling more of ancient Egypt's textile tale. Because, my friends, there's still a lot more yarn to spin. So, as we wrap our minds around the ancient Egyptian textile workshops, let's peel back another layer of the linen legend. That whole pristine white wardrobe thing. You know what I'm talking about. The classic image of ancient Egyptians swanning around in gleaming white ensembles, like they're all auditioning for a detergent commercial. But hold on to your hieroglyphics, because this is where artful myth meets colourful reality. First things first, yes, the Egyptians did love their white linen. It was the go-to choice, a timeless classic like the little black dress or a good pair of jeans. White wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a symbol of purity and status. But here's the kicker. Not everyone was wandering around in bleached brilliance. While the elite could afford to maintain that dazzling white look, most folks were likely wearing linen in its natural shades. Think ecru, beige, or what we might generously call earthy tones. Bleaching linen was no small feat. It involved soaking it in a mix of natron, a naturally occurring salt, and sunbathing it until it reached that coveted shade of alabaster. This was labor-intensive and costly, much like trying to keep a white couch clean in a house full of toddlers. For the ordinary Egyptian, spending resources on bleaching linens was about as practical as buying a solid gold toilet brush. Now, let's add some color to this picture. Contrary to popular belief, ancient Egyptians were not color-shy. They loved their dyes and patterns, and their wardrobes were anything but a monochrome affair. Enter the world of dyes, reds, blues, yellows, and greens. The Egyptians had a palette that would give any modern art supply store a run for its money. Take indigo, for instance. You might think of it as the blue of your favorite pair of jeans, but for the Egyptians, indigo was a prized color. Obtained from the woad plant, this dye required quite the process to extract. It was the ancient world's version of a luxury item, a bit like owning a high-end sports car today, a flashy sign of wealth and taste. And how about red? The color of passion, power, and occasionally a well-cooked lobster. In Egypt, it was derived from ochre or madder, and while less expensive than blue, it still carried a punch. Red was often associated with the deity Seth, known for his chaotic energy, which might explain why it wasn't everyone's first choice for a casual Friday outfit. But throw in some red stripes or patterns, and you were making a statement, bold, defiant, and maybe just a tad rebellious. Color wasn't just for show, it was steeped in symbolism. Yellow and gold hues were linked to the sun and gods like Ra, representing eternal life. The color green, derived from malachite, symbolized fertility and rebirth. Wearing green could be your ancient way of saying, I'm all about that new beginnings life. Meanwhile, black wasn't a morose color. It symbolized the afterlife, the rich soil of the Nile, and regeneration. It was like wearing a philosophical statement on your sleeve, quite literally. Patterns also played a role in this colorful narrative. Geometric designs, stripes, and even embroidered motifs were part of the Egyptian textile repertoire. They weren't just decorative, they conveyed messages about the wearer's identity, social standing, and even religious affiliations. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of wearing a band t-shirt or a sports jersey. Your clothing said something about who you were and what you valued. Now, Let's zoom out for a second and talk economics because, as always, money talks. Dyeing fabric wasn't cheap. It required specific plants, minerals, and a lot of labour. This meant that coloured garments were a luxury accessible mainly to those who could afford to splash a little cash. So, when you were strutting around in a snazzy coloured tunic, you were basically saying, I've got the coin and the connections. For those in the lower echelons of society, having a splash of colour could mean saving up for that one special garment, a bit like splurging on a designer item today. It was a way to stand out, to feel a connection to the divine or the powerful, even if just for a festival or a special occasion. And let's be real, who wouldn't want a little extra pop in their wardrobe when celebrating the latest harvest or religious festival? Politically, colours and patterns could be a way of aligning oneself with a particular ruler or dynasty. The ruling class often set the trends, and the masses, in turn, followed suit, assuming they could afford it. If the pharaoh was all about that indigo life, you can bet there was a surge in blue-dyed garments among those who wanted to stay in fashion and favour. And speaking of staying in favour, let's not forget the priests. These guys knew how to rock a robe and were often seen in garments that reflected their high status and divine connections. With their colourful patterns and intricate designs, priestly garments were the haute couture of the ancient world. If you were a priest, your wardrobe wasn't just about looking good, it was about manifesting your role as a mediator between the gods and the people. Wear that tunic with pride, because it's practically a holy relic. So, while the myth of the pristine white garment is easy on the eyes, the reality of ancient Egyptian fashion was as vibrant and complex as the society itself. It tells a story of status, symbolism, and the eternal human itch to express oneself through what we wear. And as we close this chapter on Egyptian textiles, remember that every thread, colour, and pattern carried with it a deeper significance than mere aesthetics. In the grand tapestry of history, ancient Egyptian fashion was more than just a means of covering up. It was a language, a vivid, colourful language that spoke of identity, power, and belief. As we prepare to delve even deeper into the world of ancient textiles, let's keep our eyes peeled for the stories woven into every garment, because there's still more to unravel in this kaleidoscope of history. So, while we're still basking in the kaleidoscope of ancient Egyptian fashion, let's tie up this tapestry with a neat little bow. It's time to talk about the legacy of Egyptian textiles because, spoiler alert, these ancient threads didn't just fade into obscurity like last year's fashion faux pas. No, these textiles have left a lasting impression, like that time you accidentally sat on a wet bench. The impact of Egyptian textiles on later cultures is as undeniable as Cleopatra's charm. Let's start with the facts. The Egyptians were absolute trendsetters. Their mastery of linen weaving and dyeing made them the Gucci of the ancient world. Fast forward to the Romans who, like any good empire, knew when to adopt a good thing. They snagged Egyptian linen with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. Roman togas, those iconic symbols of power and prestige, often included fine Egyptian linen, proving that even in ancient times, a little bit of Egyptian flair could elevate your wardrobe from drab to fab. But it wasn't just about looking good. Egyptian textiles were woven into the very fabric of trade. They were exported far and wide, a testament to their quality and desirability. Imagine caravans trekking across the desert laden with bales of fine linen, like ancient versions of Amazon delivery trucks, only with less two-day shipping and a bit more sand. By the time the Silk Road got its act together, Egyptian textiles were already a hot commodity, making their way to markets as far afield as India and Greece. And let's not forget the influence on early Christian communities. You see, as Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, Egyptian textiles found a new role as ecclesiastical garments. The early Christian church adopted the style and quality of these textiles for vestments, which were imbued with symbolism and sacred significance. You might say, Egyptian linen went from a fashion statement to a statement of faith, proving that good taste never goes out of style. So how did we piece together this patchwork of history? Enter modern archaeology, the ultimate detective story, minus the trench coat and magnifying glass. Archaeologists have been unearthing the secrets of Egyptian textile production for centuries, like patient detectives sifting through a massive, ancient laundry basket. From tomb excavations revealing mummified remains swaddled in linen to ancient depictions of weavers at work, each find is a thread in the larger narrative of Egyptian craftsmanship. One of the most significant archaeological discoveries came in the form of the Turin Papyrus, a document that provides detailed insights into the processes of textile production. It's like the ancient equivalent of a YouTube tutorial, minus the upbeat background music. This papyrus, along with countless other artifacts, has helped archaeologists piece together not just how textiles were made, but why they mattered in the grand scheme of things. And let's not overlook the gritty realities that archaeology uncovers. Sure, ancient textiles are romanticized today, but back then it was a world of sweat, toil, and a fair amount of grit. The romantic vision of Egyptian weavers serenely crafting delicate threads is quickly replaced by the image of labourers slogging through fields of flax or hunching over looms for hours on end. It's a reminder that behind every luxurious fabric lies a story of human effort and endurance. The fascination with Egyptian textiles endures, perhaps because they encapsulate both the elegance and the hard realities of ancient life. They're a testament to humanity's unyielding desire to create beauty, even when faced with the harshest of conditions. The ancient Egyptians didn't just weave fabric, they wove a legacy that continues to inspire awe and admiration. So, as you wrap yourself in the comfort of modern textiles, remember the ancient artisans who, thread by thread, crafted garments that told stories of power, faith, and identity. They left a legacy that has transcended the sands of time, reminding us that even the simplest of materials can create the most profound impact. And with that, we bid adieu to the world of ancient Egyptian textiles. A world where the loom was a tool of both survival and expression, where linen was as valuable as gold, and where the threads of history were spun with care, creativity, and a touch of ancient magic. So next time you pull on a piece of fabric, think of the stories it could tell, the legacy of those who came before woven into every fibre, because in the end, history isn't just written in books, it's woven into the very fabric of our lives. Celtic knot artistry, a tantalizing tapestry of loops and curves, is one of those things that seems to have sprung from the earth fully formed, like Athena from Zeus's noggin. But before we get too carried away with mythology, let's ground this in some good old-fashioned Bronze Age dirt. Picture this. It's about 3,000 years ago, and the Celts are busy etching simple spirals and geometric patterns into stones, long before their descendants would start slapping them on t-shirts and tattoos. This isn't just arts and crafts time, these designs are the seeds of a cultural legacy that'd endure millennia. Now, let's not kid ourselves. These early artists weren't sitting around contemplating the transcendental beauty of their creations over a latte. Nope, they were likely more concerned with practical matters like not freezing to death or getting trampled by a herd of disgruntled aurochs. But somehow, despite the lack of social media or even a decent sketchpad, these folks managed to carve out a niche in history with nothing more than some rudimentary tools and a knack for aesthetics. Talk about making do with what you've got. The origins of these designs are tangled, much like the knots themselves. Scholars trace the roots of Celtic artistry back to the Hallstatt culture, named after a small village in Austria where they found some pretty nifty artifacts. We're talking around 1200 BC, give or take a few centuries. The Hallstatt folks were early Celts who traded with neighbours like the Etruscans and Greeks, picking up a few pointers on how to jazz up their own stuff. You know, a little cultural exchange never hurt anyone, just like swapping Spotify playlists. By the time the Latin culture rolled around in about 450 BC, Celtic art started to look more like the intricate knots we recognise today. Think of Latin as the Renaissance of Celtic design, where things got seriously fancy. They ditched the blocky geometric look for more flowing organic lines. Imagine the evolution from a Nokia 3310 to a sleek smartphone, except instead of apps, you've got spirals and interlacing patterns. But let's not romanticize this too much. These designs weren't just for show. They likely had symbolic meanings, possibly linked to the Celts' beliefs in the interconnectedness of life and the universe. Or maybe they were just really good at doodling. Either way, it's clear these patterns were important. They adorned everything from weapons and jewelry to stone carvings and metalwork. And unlike today's artists, who have the luxury of digital design tools, these artisans were carving directly into the medium, no control but Z for them. As the Celts expanded their territories across Europe, From the British Isles to what's now Turkey, their art went along for the ride. And with it came a mashup of influences from other cultures. The Romans, who had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the Celts, admired their artistry even as they tried to conquer them. Think of it as the ultimate compliment. I love your work, but I'm still going to take over your land. Despite the Roman Empire's best efforts to stamp out Celtic culture, their knotwork survived, probably because it was hard to argue with a design that looked so darn cool. Plus, it was practically immortalized in stone. Fast forward a few centuries, and these patterns found a new home in the Christian iconography of the early medieval period, adorning illuminated manuscripts like the Book of Kells. Talk about a glow-up. So, next time you see a Celtic knot, remember, it's more than just a pretty design. It's a testament to thousands of years of history, cultural exchange, and the enduring human desire to leave a mark on the world. Even if that mark is just a really intricate doodle on a rock. And while the Celts might not have had Instagram, they certainly knew something about going viral. And just like that, we're diving deeper into the swirly world of Celtic knots. Now, before we get too tangled up in the romantic visions of ancient treasure maps, or the less plausible Wi-Fi passwords of yore, let's set the record straight. Yes, these knots look like they could unlock the secrets of the universe, or at least the secret to a really good cup of coffee, but the truth is both more mundane and more profound. First off, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the leprechaun in the knot. The idea that these intricate designs were coded messages leading to buried gold is a fantastic story that belongs more in a Dan Brown novel than in real life. Imagine a Celtic chieftain hunched over a stone, carving a series of loops and spirals with the hope that, centuries later, someone would decipher it and find a pot of gold. It's a great plot twist, but there's zero evidence to back it up. The Celts didn't need a cryptic code when they had a perfectly good barter system and, real life to deal with. So, what were these knots all about if not secret codes? Let's think spiritual and philosophical, because these designs were less about hoarding wealth and more about reflecting the interconnectedness of life. The Celts had this whole cosmic vibes thing down to a science. Well, as much as you can when science is still a few centuries off. They saw the world as a web of interlinked forces, where everything was connected in an endless cycle. Life, death, rebirth. It all flowed together like one big, mystical Celtic knot. The knots themselves are often endless, with no obvious beginning or end, symbolizing eternity and the cyclical nature of existence. Picture them as the ancient equivalent of a motivational Instagram post about life's journey. Except instead of hashtags and filters, you had stone and metal. And unlike today's fleeting digital likes, these designs were meant to last, as eternal as the concepts they represented. Religious undertones? You bet. The Celts were a spiritual bunch, and their art reflected their beliefs. They worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own domains and responsibilities. These deities were thought to interact with the world in complex ways, much like the knots themselves. The patterns could represent the divine threads weaving through the mortal realm, a reminder that the gods were always watching, even if they didn't always intervene. Consider the famous Trinity knot, or triquetra, a classic symbol in Celtic art. This three-pointed design is often interpreted as representing the triple goddess maiden, mother, and crone, or the Christian Holy Trinity. It's a testament to the Celts' knack for creating symbols that could seamlessly transition from pagan to Christian contexts, showing a flexibility that would make even the most skilled yoga practitioner jealous. Now, let's talk about the economics of these designs. Crafting a Celtic knot wasn't just an exercise in spiritual reflection, it was also a demonstration of technical skill and artistic prowess. Creating these intricate patterns required a steady hand, a keen eye, and a lot of patience, qualities that were as valuable then as they are now. Artisans who could produce such work were highly sought after, their skills commanding respect and, presumably, a pretty penny. This wasn't just art for art's sake, it was a career, a way to earn a living and elevate one's status within society. So, next time you admire a Celtic design, remember that it was also a business card of sorts, proclaiming the maker's talent to the world. While we're busting myths, let's address another one, the notion that these designs were merely decorative. Sure, they look fantastic on jewelry and manuscripts, but their presence on weapons and armor suggests a deeper significance. Imagine going into battle with a sword adorned with these symbols. It wasn't just about looking good while swinging a blade. It was about invoking protection, strength, and the favor of the gods. These knots were talismans as much as they were art, a reminder that the fight was about more than just the clash of steel. It was about destiny, honor, and the eternal cycle of life. As these patterns crossed borders, they picked up influences from other cultures, much like a backpacker collecting souvenirs. The Celts' interactions with neighboring societies meant their art evolved, incorporating new styles and ideas while retaining its core identity. This cultural exchange enriched Celtic art, adding layers of meaning and complexity to the knots. It's a bit like fusion cuisine, but with fewer calories and more historical weight. And let's not forget the role of the monks, those medieval scribes who took these designs and ran with them right into the pages of illuminated manuscripts. The Book of Kells, for instance, is a masterpiece of Celtic art. Its pages brimming with ornate knots and swirling patterns that elevate the Gospels into something truly divine. These monks weren't just preserving religious texts, they were capturing the essence of Celtic spirituality and artistry for future generations. They were the original content creators, crafting visuals that still captivate us today. So, while it's fun to imagine Celtic knots as treasure maps or ancient tech blueprints, the truth is they offer something even more valuable, a glimpse into a world where art, spirituality, and life were inextricably linked. They remind us of a time when people saw themselves as part of a greater whole, their lives woven into the universe's eternal tapestry. And while the modern world might have traded stone carvings for digital screens, the desire to leave a mark, a beautiful, intricate mark, remains as strong as ever. Now, isn't that a legacy worth knotting over? And speaking of leaving a mark, let's dive into the gritty details of how these Celtic knots were actually made, sans any modern conveniences like tutorials or handy design software. Picture yourself in the role of a Celtic artisan, chisel in hand, staring at a slab of stone or a blank page of vellum. The tools you had? Let's just say they were more Flintstones than Jetsons. We're talking about rudimentary tools made from bone, antler, or iron, sourced from local materials because, surprise, surprise, there wasn't an Amazon Prime delivery in sight. Creating these intricate designs was no walk in the park. It was a labor-intensive process requiring more patience than waiting for a dial-up modem to connect. If you remember that sound, you know the struggle. The artisans started with a series of interlocking circles and lines, using a compass-like instrument fashioned from whatever was on hand. Imagine trying to draw perfect loops and curves without a stencil or grid. The precision required was astronomical, and yet somehow they managed to pull it off. Now, let's not romanticize the resources at their disposal. Stone, metal, wood, and later vellum were the primary canvases for these designs. Stone, in particular, was a favorite medium for the Celts. Imagine spending hours, if not days, chipping away at granite or limestone to create patterns that were as much about permanence as they were about aesthetics. Stone carvings were like the original blockbuster movies, big, bold, and designed to make an impression. Metalwork was another arena where Celtic artistry shone. Gold, silver, bronze, and iron were the metals of choice, each requiring its own set of skills to manipulate. These weren't just pretty patterns to adorn your average brooch or torque, they were status symbols, a visible display of wealth and power. The complexity of a design often correlated with the status of its owner. More loops and knots, more prestige. It was like driving a luxury car, but without the carbon footprint. When it came to illuminated manuscripts, the materials got a bit more refined. Vellum, made from calfskin, was the medieval equivalent of premium paper. These manuscripts weren't just books, they were works of art. The Book of Kells, for instance, is made up of 340 folios, each page a testament to the painstaking dedication of the monks who crafted them. The pigments used in these manuscripts were derived from a variety of natural sources: lapis lazuli for blue, ochre for yellow, and verdigris for green. These colours weren't just slapped on willy-nilly, they were applied with precision, each hue telling part of a larger story. The labour involved in creating a single manuscript was immense. It could take years to complete a book, with multiple scribes and artists working in tandem. It was a team effort, akin to producing a blockbuster film today. Each person had a role, whether it was scribing the text, illustrating the margins or applying the gold leaf. And believe me, applying gold leaf was no joke. It required a steady hand and a lot of patience. One slip, and you could ruin hours of work. Economic realities also played a role in the creation of these masterpieces. The materials were pricey, and the skills needed to produce them were rare and highly valued. This wasn't a hobby for the faint-hearted or the financially strapped. Artisans who could execute these complex designs were in high demand, and their work was often commissioned by the elite. Think of them as the celebrity designers of their time, crafting bespoke pieces for the who's who of Celtic society. Of course, the myth-busting reality is that not every Celtic knot was a flawless masterpiece. Mistakes happened, and not every artisan was a Michelangelo with a chisel. But here's the kicker. The imperfections didn't detract from the beauty. They added character, reminding us that these were human creations, born from sweat, skill, and a little bit of magic. It's a testament to human ingenuity that these designs not only survived but thrived across centuries. In terms of technique, one of the most mind-boggling aspects is how these artisans achieved such symmetry and precision. Without any digital aid, they relied on a keen understanding of mathematics and geometry. Yes, folks, math was their secret weapon. Using simple tools, they crafted complex grids as the backbone of their designs. These grids allowed them to map out the intricate patterns with precision, ensuring everything flowed as it should. It's like a medieval version of a CAD program, but with more blisters and fewer shortcuts. Let's not overlook the social and cultural dimensions that influenced these designs. The Celts were a tribal society, and identity was a big deal. Clan symbols and personal emblems often found their way into knot designs, adding layers of meaning. These weren't just pretty patterns, they were a visual language, speaking to identity, heritage, and belonging. In a world without social media profiles, your knot design was your calling card. And while we're on the subject of cultural exchange, it's worth noting that as the Celts expanded their territories, they weren't shy about borrowing ideas. They interacted with the Romans, Norse, and other neighbouring cultures, picking up new techniques and styles along the way. This cross-cultural pollination enriched Celtic art, making it a dynamic and evolving form. It's a bit like travelling the world and coming back with new recipes. The core flavours remain, but there's an added zest that keeps things interesting. So, as we untangle the threads of Celtic knot-making, remember that these designs were more than just art. They were a testament to human creativity and resilience. A reminder that even without modern conveniences, people found ways to express their beliefs and identities. They were the social media of their time, broadcasting messages of faith, power, and connection in a language as universal as it was unique. And in that sense, Celtic knots are not just relics of the past, they're a bridge to understanding a world that was both profoundly different and strikingly similar to our own. So take a moment to appreciate the artistry and craftsmanship that went into each loop and curve. In a world where instant gratification rules, there's something deeply satisfying about knowing these designs were the product of time, skill, and a little bit of Celtic tenacity. And as we continue to unravel the story of these intricate patterns, remember, there's still more to discover in this tangled tapestry of history. Stay tuned, because the knotty adventure is far from over. Now, while we're still caught in this Celtic whirlwind, let's hit the ground running and dive into the economic and social undercurrents of Celtic knot artistry. After all, these artisans weren't just sitting around in a forest clearing waiting for inspiration to strike like lightning. Nope, they were more like the rock stars of their day, minus the groupies and pyrotechnics, but with plenty of prestige and cultural clout. First off, let's talk about patronage. In the Celtic world, artistic talent didn't just pop up in a vacuum. It took resources, connections, and a touch of good old-fashioned networking. Think of it as the original Kickstarter campaign, but instead of digital pledges, you had the backing of chieftains and nobility who were keen to flaunt their taste and influence. If you were an artisan with a knack for weaving those mesmerizing knots, you better believe you had to rub elbows with the elite. And by rub elbows, I mean craft them. A killer talk that screamed wealth and power. This wasn't a hobby for the weekend warrior, it was a full-blown career path. And while we might not have the exact figures, because, let's face it, the Celts weren't big on keeping ledgers, it's safe to say that the costs involved in producing these masterpieces were nothing to sneeze at. Materials like gold, silver, and fine pigments weren't just lying around for anyone to pick up. They were traded, possibly even bartered for, and they came at a premium. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of sourcing artisanal, handcrafted, organic materials. Pricey, but oh so worth it for the end product. Artisans held a unique space in the social hierarchy. They weren't just craftsmen, they were gatekeepers of cultural identity and status. Their work adorned the most revered places and people, from the ceremonial swords of warriors to the sacred pages of illuminated manuscripts. In a society where oral tradition was king, these visual narratives were a powerful medium of expression and legacy. Their skills put them on a different playing field, one where they could wield influence without ever having to pick up a sword. Now, let's bust a myth wide open. The idea that these designs were made in isolation by solitary geniuses. The truth is far less romantic and much more collaborative. Artisans often worked in workshops, much like today's tech startups. Picture a bustling hub of creativity, with master craftsmen and apprentices honing their skills together. These workshops were the breeding grounds for innovation, where new techniques were tested and perfected. And while they might not have had beanbag chairs or free espresso, they did have a shared vision of pushing the boundaries of their art. As for the costs, let's not forget the value of time. Crafting a single piece could take weeks or even months, especially if it was destined to be part of a high-profile commission. Time was money, literally, and the longer an artisan spent on a piece, the higher its value. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about investing in something that would last, a tangible asset in a world where permanence was rare. Speaking of permanence, let's not overlook the fact that these designs often served as social currency. In a society that prized status and prestige, owning a piece of intricate Celtic art was akin to driving a luxury sports car today. It wasn't just a display of personal wealth, it was a statement, a way of saying, look at my connections, my taste, my power. Artisans, in turn, could leverage their reputation to secure even more lucrative commissions, creating a cycle of success that elevated their status and influence. This brings us to a sobering reality. Not all artisans enjoyed the same level of success. Just like today, the art world was competitive and not everyone made it to the top. Many toiled away in obscurity, their works lost to the sands of time. But those who did make a name for themselves could achieve a level of renown that transcended their own lifetimes. Their works became heirlooms passed down through generations, each piece carrying the weight of history and heritage. So, who were the patrons bankrolling these creative endeavors? In short, the elite, the chieftains, the warrior class, and the religious leaders. These were the folks with the means and motivation to commission artwork that reflected their own values and status. They weren't just buying pretty objects, they were investing in symbols of power and eternity. The more complicated the knot, the more layers of meaning it held, and the more it impressed the neighbors. It was like having a Picasso on your wall today, only with more cultural significance and less need for a security system. The relationship between patron and artisan was symbiotic. While patrons provided the resources and social standing, artisans delivered the goods that reinforced the patron's image and legacy. It was a delicate dance of mutual benefit, where the stakes were high and the rewards even higher. In a way, the patron-artisan dynamic was the Celtic version of a modern-day endorsement deal, where both parties stood to gain from the arrangement. And let's not forget the artisan's knack for innovation. These weren't just craftsmen following a template, they were pioneers, experimenting with techniques and styles that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They were like the Steve Jobs of their time, except instead of unveiling the latest gadget, they were crafting designs that would echo through the ages. Each new piece was a testament to their skill and imagination, a chance to leave a mark on a world that was ever-changing. In navigating the economic waters of Celtic society, these artisans demonstrated a shrewd understanding of market dynamics. They knew how to balance quality and quantity, how to maximize their output without sacrificing craftsmanship. It was a fine line to walk, but those who mastered it could secure their place in history. Their work wasn't just about survival, it was about legacy, creating something that would endure long after they were gone. Artisans were also adept at adapting to changing tastes and trends. As Celtic society evolved, so too did its art. Influences from other cultures seeped into their designs, enriching the visual language of knots and spirals. This adaptability was a testament to their ingenuity and resilience, qualities that have ensured Celtic art's lasting appeal. It was a world in flux, and these artisans managed to stay ahead of the curve, continually reinventing their craft to suit the times. So, as we continue to unravel the threads of Celtic knot artistry, remember that these designs were more than just decorative motifs. They were a complex interplay of art, economics, and society, a testament to the power of creativity and human ingenuity. In a world without modern conveniences, these artisans found ways to express their beliefs and identities, leaving a legacy that continues to captivate us today. As we prepare to dive deeper into this intricate tapestry, let's keep in mind that there's still so much more to discover in the world of Celtic knots. Stay tuned, because this knotty adventure is far from over. And just like that, we're hitting the home stretch in our Celtic knot odyssey. Let's unravel how these ancient designs have wormed their way into the fabric of modern life, weaving through pop culture like a persistent thread that refuses to fray. From tattoo parlors to fashion runways, Celtic knots are having a moment, and it's not just a passing fad. In a world where minimalism reigns supreme, these intricate patterns prove that complexity still has its champions. First, let's take a stroll down the runways of high fashion. Designers like Alexander McQueen and Vivienne Westwood have tapped into the rich tapestry of Celtic art, drawing inspiration from those enigmatic knots to create clothing that marries the old with the new. It's like the Celts have been given a second lease on life, with their designs sashaying down the catwalks of Paris and Milan. These patterns, once laboriously etched into stone or metal, now adorn the sleekest fabrics, proving that what's old can indeed become new again. The tattoo industry, with its penchant for nostalgia and cultural symbolism, has also embraced Celtic knots with open arms, or should I say, open skin. These designs have become a staple, a way for people to wear their heritage on their sleeves. And let's be honest, when it comes to tattoos, nothing says, "I'm deeply mysterious and culturally aware," quite like a well-placed Celtic knot. It's a form of self-expression that taps into our desire for identity and connection, a permanent nod to a time when art was as much about symbolism as it was about aesthetics. But hold your horses before you get carried away with visions of mystical druids whispering secrets into the wind. The romanticized view of the Celts as ethereal beings perpetually shrouded in mist is a delightful fantasy, but it's also a bit of a historical hiccup. The Celts were practical, adaptive, and far from the magic-wielding caricatures that often populate our imaginations. Their legacy lies not in spells and incantations, but in their art and its enduring influence. It's a testament to human creativity, not supernatural prowess. Now, if you're wondering how these ancient patterns have managed to remain relevant in a world obsessed with clean lines and minimalist design, you're not alone. The appeal of Celtic knots in contemporary culture is a fascinating conundrum. On one hand, we have a global aesthetic leaning towards simplicity. Think Scandinavian design, with its muted colours and unadorned surfaces. Yet, here we are, still swooning over the intricate interweavings of Celtic artistry. Perhaps the allure lies in the knot's narrative quality. Each loop and spiral tells a story, inviting us to get lost in its complexity, to trace the paths and ponder their meaning. In a society that's increasingly focused on the here and now, these designs offer a welcome respite, a chance to connect with something timeless and enduring. It's a bit like stepping into a time machine, without the risk of awkward encounters with ancestors who might not appreciate your modern wardrobe choices. The modern resurgence of Celtic knots also speaks to a broader cultural phenomenon, our collective yearning for authenticity and connection. In an era dominated by digital interactions and fleeting trends, these designs offer a tangible link to the past. They're a reminder of a time when art was crafted by hand, when each piece was a labour of love and skill. It's a nod to a slower, more deliberate way of life, a counterpoint to the rapid pace of modernity. And let's not forget the economic implications of this resurgence. The demand for Celtic-inspired designs has created a niche market, one that supports artisans and craftspeople who continue to practice traditional techniques. It's a reminder that even in a world of mass production, there's still a place for the handmade, the bespoke, the unique. These designs are more than just pretty patterns. They're a testament to the enduring value of craftsmanship. So, as we draw the curtain on our Celtic knot adventure, let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of these ancient designs. They're more than just relics of a bygone era. They're living, breathing symbols of human creativity and resilience. In a world that's constantly changing, they've managed to remain relevant, proving that sometimes the most intricate paths are the ones worth following. In the end, the story of Celtic knot artistry is a testament to the enduring power of art to transcend time and culture. It's a reminder that even in the face of simplicity and minimalism, complexity and tradition still have their place. These designs are a bridge to a past that's both familiar and foreign, a connection to a world that, despite its differences, shares our same desire to leave a mark. So, the next time you spot a Celtic knot, whether on a piece of jewelry, a fashion accessory, or inked on someone's skin, remember that you're looking at a piece of history. It's a testament to human ingenuity and artistic expression, a reminder that even the most tangled paths can lead to something beautiful. And in a world that's often obsessed with the new and the now, there's something profoundly satisfying about knowing that these ancient symbols continue to captivate and inspire us, knot after knot, generation after generation. In the chill of an Irish autumn over 2,000 years ago, the Celts were preparing for a party that would make today's Halloween look like a polite afternoon tea. Cast your mind to ancient Ireland, where the air was thick with the scent of peat and the anticipation of Samhain, a festival marking the grand finale of the harvest season and the start of the Celtic New Year. This was the time when these ancient folks believed the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest, which was both eerie and incredibly convenient for explaining why Uncle Fergus could never keep track of his livestock. Oh, the sheep? Must be those pesky spirits again. Samhain, pronounced Samhain, because why make it easy? Wasn't just about spooking yourself silly. It had serious astronomical significance. The Celts were no slouches when it came to stargazing. They timed Samhain to align with the halfway point between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. Think of it as a cosmic calendar alert that screamed, "Time to bring in the harvest before everything freezes solid." This was crucial because if you missed that window, you couldn't exactly pop down to the local Tesco for a bag of potatoes. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, signalling the end of the agricultural year, the Celts gathered to both celebrate and prepare for the long, dark winter ahead. The festival was a kind of communal insurance policy, ensuring everyone had enough food and firewood stashed away. And let's be honest, it was also a great excuse to gather around a bonfire, share stories, and maybe indulge in a little fermented barley water. Just a sip, of course, but let's not romanticize it too much. Life in ancient Ireland wasn't all mystical rituals and moonlit dances. The average lifespan was about 35 years, assuming you didn't get caught in a skirmish or succumb to an untimely bout of dysentery. So, as much as we love the idea of ethereal spirits drifting through the misty fields, it's worth remembering that the Celts had very real-world concerns, like making sure their cattle survived the winter and that they didn't end up on someone else's menu. Now, about that veil between worlds, the Celts believed the souls of the dead returned to their former homes during Samhain, which would have been a little awkward if you hadn't cleaned up. This concept wasn't just about ghosts and ghouls. It was a cultural mechanism to explain the unexplainable. If your harvest failed or your sheep wandered off, well, it was probably the spirits at work. This wasn't just myth for myth's sake. It was an early attempt at rationalizing life's unpredictabilities. Of course, the idea of a thin veil had its perks. It meant that during Samhain, communication with the other world was at its peak, which, if you were a druid, was your time to shine. Druids were the rock stars of the Celtic world, wielding influence as both spiritual leaders and political advisors. They were like the Swiss army knives of ancient society, and Samhain was their Glastonbury. But let's not kid ourselves. The notion of the dead roaming freely wasn't entirely comforting. To ward off any malevolent spirits, the Celts donned costumes made of animal skins and heads, which sounds a lot like the world's first Halloween costume party. Whether or not this was effective is up for debate, but it certainly added to the festival's theatrical flair. Picture a rustic masquerade ball where everyone's outfit is more roadkill chic than haute couture. Now, you might be wondering how we know all this. After all, the Celts weren't exactly prolific writers. In fact, they left no written records at all. Our understanding of Samhain comes from later accounts written by Roman and Christian scribes, who were often more interested in pointing out the so-called pagan practices than preserving them for posterity. It's like learning about your weird cousin's habits from a disapproving neighbour. So, as you cozy up and let the tales of ancient Samhain swirl around you, remember that beneath the layers of myth and legend are people much like us, grappling with the mysteries of life, death, and the inexplicable disappearance of sheep. These festivals were as much about survival as celebration. A reminder that sometimes the best way to face the darkness is with a little light, some good company, and perhaps a tall tale or two. As the embers from the last paragraph cool, let's fan the flames of curiosity and dive headfirst into the blazing heart of Samhain's rituals. Picture this. The Celts were no strangers to a good bonfire, but this wasn't your run-of-the-mill backyard s'mores session. These fires were gigantic, infernos of epic proportions, crackling with purpose. Sure, they were mesmerizing to watch, but they also served as a spiritual bug zapper, drawing in and burning away the malevolent spirits that dared to cross into the world of the living. These bonfires weren't just about pyrotechnic displays. They were a communal effort, a village-wide insurance policy against the supernatural. Everyone contributed, tossing in bits of the harvest, perhaps even a snack for the spirits. Think of it as ancient trick-or-treating, but with fewer fun-sized candy bars and more smoked turnips. The real kicker? People would extinguish the fires in their own hearths and relight them from the Samhain bonfire. It was a symbolic reset, ensuring that each household carried a spark of the communal flame, the ancient equivalent of sharing a Netflix password among friends. Now, let's talk fashion, or lack thereof. Forget your sleek synthetic costumes with plastic masks and polyester capes. The Celts were rocking something far more primal, animal skins and heads. We're talking full-on beast mode, a disguise strategy that was two parts, practicality, one part absurdity. The logic was simple. Spirits were apparently not the keenest observers. By dressing up as animals, people hoped to confuse the spirits, effectively saying, "Nope, no humans here, just a herd of oddly upright sheep." This wasn't about making a sartorial statement, it was survival. In a time when people genuinely believed they might encounter a disgruntled ghost of harvests past, the costumes served as a rudimentary form of camouflage. If you stumbled upon a spirit, your fox mask might just convince it that you were too stringy to bother with. Plus, let's be real, it's not like there was a Celtic Vogue critiquing your choice of antlers. Economically speaking, these costumes were a stroke of genius. Why invest in a new wardrobe when you could repurpose what you had on hand? This was especially practical in a society where resources were precious and shopping involved far more hunting than browsing. If you could wear your dinner, why not? It's the ultimate insustainable fashion move over eco-conscious influences. The Celts were light years ahead. But the bonfires and costumes were just the beginning. Samhain was a time of divination, a spiritual sneak peek into the future. The Celts were big on prophecy, and Samhain offered the perfect opportunity to consult the oracles, whether that meant a druid with a penchant for theatrics or a more DIY approach with apple peels and hazelnuts. Yes, you heard that right. Apples were used in divination rituals, and while it might sound like the setup for a bad punchline, tossing apple peels over your shoulder could supposedly reveal the initials of your future spouse. Talk about low-tech dating apps. Hazelnuts, on the other hand, were used to predict fidelity and fortune. Young women would name nuts after potential suitors and toss them into the fire, watching to see which one burned steadily. If your nut exploded, well, that was a red flag hotter than the flames themselves. It was tinder, but with a touch more pyro. Now, while all this sounds delightfully whimsical, these rituals had a serious undertone. They were a way to exert some semblance of control over an unpredictable world. In a time when a bad winter could mean the difference between life and death, knowing, or at least pretending to know, what the future held was a comfort. It was an ancient coping mechanism, a way to turn the chaos of nature into something a bit more manageable, even if it was all based on the whims of roasted nuts. So, as we circle back to the heart of Samhain, it's clear that beneath the layers of myth and magic there was a very practical side to these traditions. They weren't just about placating spirits or predicting romantic futures, but about fostering community, ensuring survival, and making sense of a world that was often inexplicable. It was a time when the lines between the living and the supernatural blurred, but the realities of life were all too clear. As we leave this fiery festival behind, remember that the Celts were navigating a world of uncertainty with a fierce blend of humour, resourcefulness, and a touch of the theatrical. The story doesn't end here, though the sparks from Samhain's bonfires will continue to illuminate the path ahead. As we move from the flickering bonfires of Samhain, let's pivot to the real conductors of this ancient orchestra, the Druids. These folks were the ultimate multitaskers, balancing roles as religious leaders, legal advisors, and political consultants. Imagine them as the Celtic equivalents of a Swiss army knife, minus the corkscrew. Druids were the mystical middle managers of their time. Think of them as the HR department of the Celtic world, but with robes and incantations instead of PowerPoint presentations. They were pivotal in Samhain ceremonies, orchestrating rituals that sought to appease both the gods and the ever-demanding human community. Now, if you're picturing Gandalf types waving staffs around, hold that thought. Sure, the Druids had an air of mystery, but they were also deeply entrenched in the practicalities of daily Celtic life. They were spiritual guides, yes, but they also wielded significant political clout. It was their job to interpret omens and advise chieftains, essentially acting as ancient forecasters, predicting not just the weather, but also the outcomes of wars and harvests. Forget horoscopes. The Druids were the go-to source for your annual strategic plan. The Druids' influence wasn't just spiritual, it was also economic. They played a crucial role in tax collection, which might seem as mystical as a root canal, but was essential for keeping the communal coffers and social order in check. Picture the local Druid showing up at your door, not with a wand, but with a ledger, ready to ensure you'd contributed your fair share of grain for the communal kitty. This was no romanticized, ethereal existence. It was nitty-gritty community management, with the Druids acting as both magistrates and accountants. Imagine Merlin moonlighting as an IRS agent. While we're at it, let's debunk the myth of Druids as mere mystics dwelling in forest glades. Sure, they had a penchant for oak trees, which were sacred in their religious practices, but they were also deeply involved in the political machinations of the time. They were the confidants of kings and tribal leaders, their advice sought in matters ranging from diplomacy to warfare. In a world where alliances were as fragile as a bale of hay, the Druids' counsel was invaluable. You could say they were the original spin doctors, with a knack for keeping the peace or stirring the pot. Despite their serious responsibilities, the Druids have been heavily romanticized over the centuries. Thanks to later interpretations, often by those with a flair for the dramatic, they've been depicted as wise sages with mysterious powers rather than the pragmatic leaders they often were. This romanticization ignores the fact that they were also tasked with ensuring the community adhered to societal norms and laws. They were less about casting spells and more about casting judgment, ensuring societal rules were followed and conflicts were resolved, often through mediation rather than magic. The romantic allure of the Druids endures, of course. Who doesn't love the idea of a secretive, wise figure holding the keys to the mysteries of the universe? It's a narrative that sells books and fills movie theaters, but it overlooks the day-to-day realities of their roles. The truth is, they were as much about spreadsheets, well, the ancient equivalent, as they were about spells. The Druids were a product of their time, navigating a world where the spiritual and the practical were inseparably intertwined. But let's not get too bogged down in the mundane. The Druids did have a knack for making the ordinary seem extraordinary. They presided over ceremonies that turned the changing of seasons into cosmic events. And they did it with a flair that would make any modern-day influencer green with envy. Their ability to elevate the everyday into something transcendent is part of what makes them so compelling, even if the reality was often more about managing grain supplies than summoning spirits. As we leave the Druids for now, keep in mind that their story is far from over. There are more layers to peel back, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover. The Druids were, in many ways, the backbone of Celtic society, and their legacy continues to influence how we view the past, and perhaps even our present. So stay tuned as we continue to explore the interplay between myth and reality, and the ways in which these ancient leaders navigated a world as complex and unpredictable as our own. And speaking of complex and unpredictable worlds, let's dive into the curious transformation of Samhain as it morphed into what we now know as Halloween. It's a tale full of cultural twists, political agendas, and the kind of religious remixing that would make even the most seasoned DJ's head spin. Spoiler alert, it's not all about jack-o'-lanterns and candy corn. First, let's talk Romans. When these toga-clad conquerors started poking around the Celtic lands around 43 AD, they had a knack for cultural appropriation that was as efficient as their legions. You could say they were the original masters of rebranding. Take the Roman festival of Feralia, a late October bash honouring the dead. It conveniently overlapped with Samhain, and the Romans, not ones to miss a good party, probably thought, why not mix a little Celtic spice into our own traditions? This cultural cocktail wasn't just about fun and games, it was a strategic move to smooth over Roman-Celtic relations. Think of it as ancient diplomatic networking with a side of ritual. The Romans also brought Pomona into the mix, the goddess of fruit and trees. Her symbol? The apple. Yes, the same apple that would later become a staple in Halloween games like bobbing for apples. The Romans were practical, if nothing else, merging agricultural symbolism with existing traditions to create a seamless transition from Celtic to Roman rites. It was a merger more harmonious than most corporate takeovers today. Fast forward to the Christianization of Europe, and here comes another layer of complexity. As Christianity spread its roots deeper into the continent, the Church faced the delicate task of converting the local pagan populace. And what better way to win hearts and minds than by co-opting their favourite festivals? Enter All Saints' Day, originally celebrated in May but moved to November 1st by Pope Gregory III in the 8th century. Coincidence? Hardly. It was a shrewd move, aligning the celebration of saints with Samhain to ease the transition from pagan to Christian practices, a bit like swapping out your favourite soda for a new flavour, different label, same fizz. But hold up. Before we paint the church as the ultimate party pooper, it's worth noting that this wasn't just about stamping out paganism. It was about creating unity and a shared calendar across a fragmented Europe. Religious leaders were essentially performing a cultural balancing act, weaving together disparate traditions to forge a new, cohesive identity. It's not unlike trying to plan a family reunion where half the relatives only eat vegan and the other half think tofu is a conspiracy. Now, how did all this lead to the Halloween revelry we know today? Let's hop across the pond to America, where the holiday got its final sugary makeover. Irish immigrants brought their Samhain traditions with them during the 19th century, and before you could say boo, America had embraced Halloween with open arms and wallets. By the early 20th century, Halloween had become a national festivity, complete with costumes, parties, and, yes, candy. But why candy? The answer lies in post-war America. With sugar rationing a thing of the past, candy companies seized the opportunity to market their sweet treats as a Halloween staple. By the 1950s, trick-or-treating became as American as apple pie, and let's be honest, a lot more fun. This wasn't just a cultural shift. It was an economic bonanza, turning Halloween into a billion-dollar industry. In 2023 alone, Americans spent an eye-watering $10.6 billion on Halloween, proving that when it comes to blending tradition with commerce, no one does it quite like the land of the free and the home of the brave. So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour of how a Celtic festival honouring the dead evolved into a global celebration of the spooky and sweet. It's a testament to humanity's knack for adaptation, proving once again that when faced with a cultural crossroads, we choose the path that lets us have our cake and eat it too, preferably while dressed as a pirate or a pumpkin. As we leave this tangled web of cultural evolution, remember that the story of Samhain is far from over. Its legacy continues to shape our modern lives, a reminder that beneath the costumes and candy lies a rich tapestry of history, myth, and human ingenuity. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating tale, exploring the ways in which our ancestors navigated their own haunted landscapes, both real and imagined. So, how do we reconcile the ancient bonfires of Samhain with today's glow-in-the-dark skeletons and pumpkin spice mania? The short answer: we love a good story, especially when it involves a touch of mystery and a dash of tradition. In a world that often feels predictable, Halloween offers a momentary escape into the fantastical. But let's not kid ourselves. This transformation from Samhain to Halloween wasn't just a magical leap through time. It was a slow, complex dance of cultural fusion, commerce, and good old-fashioned human superstition. Despite the sanitization and commercialization of the holiday, Echoes of its ancient roots persist like whispers in the autumn wind. Take our love for costumes, for instance. Today we might dress as superheroes or pop culture icons, but the core idea remains the same, transforming oneself to ward off the unseen and embrace the unknown. It's a nod to our Celtic ancestors who donned animal skins to blend in with the spirits. The costumes may have changed, but the thrill of transformation is timeless. And then there's the ritual of trick-or-treating. What began as a blend of Celtic and Roman traditions, later seasoned by Christian influences, has morphed into the ultimate sugar rush. Yet, beneath the layers of commercial wrappers lies a faint echo of those ancient offerings to the spirits. Kids may not realize it, but every time they shout trick or treat, they're participating in a ritual with roots as old as agriculture itself. It's a communal contract, a nod to the past where communities would gather and share their resources, ensuring everyone had enough to survive the winter months. The enduring legacy of Samhain also speaks to our fascination with the mystical, a human trait as enduring as our penchant for storytelling. We crave the thrill of the unknown, the allure of the supernatural. Whether it's the thrill of a haunted house or the chill of a ghost story, there's a part of us that longs to connect with something beyond the mundane. It's this same impulse that drove the Celts to gather around bonfires, seeking to commune with the spirits and make sense of a world filled with uncertainties. Moreover, the persistence of these traditions underscores a fundamental aspect of human nature, our desire to find meaning and maintain connections with our past. In a world that's constantly changing, traditions like Halloween anchor us, providing continuity amidst chaos. They remind us of simpler times, of communal gatherings, and the shared stories that bind us together. In a way, celebrating Halloween is as much about honoring our ancestors as it is about indulging in candy and costumes. The economic context of Halloween today is a testament to its evolution. From humble beginnings as a harvest festival, it's grown into a behemoth of consumer culture. In 2023 alone, the United States spent approximately $10.6 billion on Halloween festivities, everything from costumes to candy to party decorations. It's a staggering figure that highlights the holiday's power to adapt and thrive in a capitalist society. Yet, beneath the glitz and glitter, there's a reminder of the festival's ancient roots, a celebration of harvest and hearth, community and continuity. And let's not forget the political and social factors that have shaped Halloween's journey. From its early days as a Celtic festival to its adoption by the Romans and later the Christian Church, each iteration of the holiday has been influenced by the prevailing powers of the time. It's a reflection of how societies adapt and evolve, absorbing and reshaping traditions to suit their own needs and narratives. This adaptability is a testament to the resilience of human culture and our ability to preserve the essence of a tradition even as its form changes. Ultimately, what does the persistence of these traditions say about us? It suggests that at our core, we're creatures of ritual and story, drawn to the mystical and the mysterious. We seek to understand the world through symbols and celebrations, weaving ancient threads into the fabric of our modern lives. Halloween, with all its commercial trappings, remains a celebration of this enduring human spirit, a tribute to our ancestors and a nod to the future. So, as you carve your jack-o'-lanterns and don your costumes, take a moment to reflect on the journey from Samhain to Halloween. Consider how these traditions, rooted in ancient beliefs and practices, continue to resonate in our lives today. It's a reminder that even in a world driven by change, some things remain constant. The power of story, the allure of the unknown, and the joy of coming together, if only for a night, to celebrate the thin veil between the worlds, both past and present. In the end, Halloween isn't just a holiday, it's a testament to the enduring power of human imagination and our unyielding desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. It's a celebration of both the seen and unseen, a dance of shadows and light, reminding us that even in the darkest times there's always room for a little magic. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real treat hidden beneath the tricks.